Good
evening. This is the in-person special meeting of the Board of Education. It is Monday, February 24th, and the time is 6:43. We're at City Hall, room 305. In attendance, I'm Jennifer Perez. Board Chair, we have Joseph Pavlovic, Maritza Extramura, Menez, Robert Traber, and Keisha Passon here. Andre Wilson, Willie Medina, Albert Benahan, and online we have Christine Baptiste Perez. Dr. Avery is joining us. The first thing we're going to talk about, the first item on the agenda is just an agreement on the dates for the full board trainings. There's a minimum of 6 sessions, including tonight's. So I'll just repeat the date that we selected last week. Tonight was the first meeting. We have one for Saturday, which is March 8th. We need to reschedule that one?
Yes, we have to.
Okay, we need to reschedule that one. We have one for March 31st, 21st, May 19th, and June 16th. So we just need to add one more for now, and then we can talk about the other dates if.
What was that April date again, Dave?
April 21st.
21st.
Any suggestions? I'll leave it free. Seventeenth is a no-no. March.
Flexible.
You can do the 17th. Or March 17th, it's a holiday, but
That works for me.
is everybody else March 17th for the alternate date?
So that replaced the 8, right?
Replacing the 8th, yeah.
Alright.
So they'll all be Monday nights, which will be, I think, easier.
And we can always understand that the state was insistent that there are dates scheduled, but they are, I believe they're fine if we have to reschedule as long as we follow up with that.
Yeah.
Is it wrong?
You said March 17th?
Yes, March 17th.
Not available.
Not available? Okay.
Evening dates, are they 6:30?
They're all in 6:30.
All right.
It's time to get work. All right, so March 17th is a no-no. Okay. Can we do 2 in April, April 7th? Is there a reason not to move for 7? April 7th? Is everybody free April 7th?
Yes. To April 7th, right?
On a Friday? Oh,
That's
wait,
a Monday.
Sorry. A Monday, April 7th.
So we understand does Dr. Dave, we have to be on all of these? Or is there like 1 or 2 that you can?
I would say if his schedule requires him to be elsewhere, it's board training. I think knowing Dr. Avery, he'd like to be
Okay,
present, but that's really
okay.
whether he can get out or not.
You got a question?
Here, answer it on the screen.
Ms. Baxter Perez, is April 7th okay?
Tentatively, if I have something change with work takes priority.
So I think this is, like, we have a tentative schedule. I can repeat the dates for everybody. Tonight, February 24th, the first one. We have March 31st, April 7th, April 21st, May 19th, June 16th. Yes. March 31st will be the second training. April 7th. April 21st. May 19th, and June 16th.
Chair.
Yes,
I don't know if you want to make a note, but I'm definitely going to be away the 18th to the 26th of June, just an FYI. That doesn't affect
What
any
is
of
that?
these dates, but I know when if you reschedule anything, you already know.
okay.
So,
All set? Agree on that? Should we take a vote? On this agenda. Just a discussion and agree. Those are very tentative dates. We'll leave it at that. And should we need to change them, please reach out to me if you're not available for those days, and we can bring it before everybody to come up with a second date. Great.
So I just wanted to make it clear.
Yes.
If a board member cannot make any of these given days that you just made, that they would have to be rescheduled
Does have to be
because we need
rescheduled.
100% attendance.
Yep.
I just want to make sure everybody understands. it.
We got some clarification on that. They were insistent the first meeting had 100% participation. They're going to allow some latitude on the other ones. If half the, but I think the wording I saw was they want to see the commitment from the board. So if half of you didn't show up, they're probably going to pay you for that. But if somebody has a work commitment or they're not well or whatever, they want to be a little more understanding of trying to align schedules for 9, 10 people, 12 actually, because we all have to have that night free. So there will be some latitude. I don't know where they draw the line. Again, we're here to do the training, but we don't regulate what's going on.
Right, no, and the only reason why I'm asking is because like, you know, she's not the only one that's busy. I have a very
Oh, yeah.
busy work schedule too. I'm not retired yet. You know, so I just wanted to know, like, if any given day somebody emails her and says, hey, Jen, you know, I can't make
Yeah.
April 21st,
No,
then
I-
you have to start all over again from the beginning, like,
Yeah, you don't have to worry about that. I would say if you can't have a forum, however, for example.
no, that's different, yeah.
But
Okay.
even, but it's 3 for, to say, I don't know what criteria they're gonna use, but the attorney, McKean did say that there's some.
Yeah, well, the bottom line is everybody should do everything that they can to make
Yeah.
it in person so we can just get this over with. You know, but I do know that things do happen and come up. So, thank you.
We're gonna turn it over to Nick and Jody. They're gonna provide us our first training.
Yeah, if I could. So, hello again. And our brand new board member. You can find it in person. We had it against the correspondence a few times. We'll be providing that new board member training for you this week, but the 26th wasn't it? Yes. Thursday?
Yeah.
That's good. Get that out of the way real quick. Here we go. So normally for a training like this, we would want to spend weeks preparing, just like we want weeks to be prepared. And this is all kind of fell into everyone's lap kind of quickly. So we've put together what we think will, for this first session in particular, because the state's very careful to write specifically what they expect out of everything. And it's actually going to be up here so we can go over it together. We're going to do the best we can to follow that, but for example, roles and responsibilities, which is one of the things they wanted us to talk about tonight. Most of you have heard a roles and responsibilities workshop at least once, some of you multiple times. Me repeating the same stuff, and you'll get this stuff later in the week. To repeat the same thing, there's a couple of things. One, it's sticking to law, words, etc. Whereas what I want to do tonight is something that we talked about with boards. In fact, I was in Stanford Saturday morning, talking to them, and I used the same presentation because they said, we're a good board, we want to get that, we want to really figure out how to lead this district forward. So I use this, and so think of this as maybe a better step in the way of how can we actually effectively govern this district. We're going to also talk about bylaws. Jody's going to lead the conversation on that. We are actually, I think I put this in. Oh, and ground rules, the same that we had the last time. We want to keep this positive. We want to be talking about what's happening in the future. It's not really an opportunity to keep going backwards, but I think you'll see the conversation will lend itself to thinking forward. So I'd start with that. and we just try to respect each other. We're aiming for this. All paddling in the same direction. I was in, this is Tolland, about 3 or 4 years ago. There was a huge conflict between the Tolland City Council or Town Council and the Tolland Board of Education. They were having all kinds of conflict. They weren't getting along well. So they sat down together as two groups working together, and they came out with a working agreement. So basically, and I have a copy of that. It came all the way down here to pass paper. Thank you, Joe. I was superintendent, not just. But basically, they just some ground rules that they came up with, and they have these laminated on walls everywhere in town, in the city town hall and in the board office building. But agreeing to engage with each other in a respectful, professional, open-minded manner, listen, understand, share, etc. You can read them. I'd like to think that in fact, I think the state is sort of expecting at some point in the near future that you come up with a sort of set of expectations for yourselves that you'll hold yourselves to. That would be one of the expectations that the state has. And I want to, I brought, this is, Jumbo was like the most famous elephant in the world, and that was Barnum's contribution to the world of circuses. So we brought this in because we always want to remember there's an elephant in the room. And it isn't just that you're doing this training because you want to get better, although I know you all want to be better. And I don't mean that in words, we want to be better. We want to be the best sport in the state. Our states with more challenges than probably any other district in the state. Anything you can learn from us to help you govern better is simply worth it. So, but we always want to remember that there's people looking over our shoulders, and they're looking for a trip or a fall or a stumble. So we want to do the very best we can for you. And we hope you'll join us with that and work together with us for this. Did I lose focus? There we go. So tonight we are going to talk about roles and responsibilities, but a little bit different. Going to kind of talk about the difference between governance and management. Talking about focusing on student achievement. I know you have some incredible financial issues and burdens that you're dealing with, but the reason we're all here and the reason the work you do today really has to, as much as possible, focus on your students and where they're going to be in 5-10 years. Fixing a school district, no matter where you are, takes years. The decisions you make today may not impact students in a classroom for 2-3 years down the road. So how do we focus on student achievement in a way that will benefit everyone? And again, that's part of what we're going to talk about tonight. Collaboration. We're going to do a little of that. We actually have a session lined up later on that's going to be about the board superintendent relationship. And so we'll focus on that more in another session. We have Dave Irwin, who is part of your support team from the State Department, who's a retired superintendent and teaches other superintendents the work. He's agreed to be part of the training with us. We also have, when we do the financial part, Ed Aaron, who is on the team as well, and is an expert in school finances. Anybody I know, we're reaching out to him to see if we can get him to be part of that. So we'll have the dates already lined up, but you might see some shifting of who's available and when they will be here. So yes.
Well, I didn't mean for you to stop your sentence, but I did have a question.
Okay, so well, because I made it up to that point, but
When you say part of the team, are you referring to the team that we were just informed of?
yes. Yeah, that sort of leadership team that's coming in, I forget the title that they gave them.
I forget it too.
Yeah. But they're the people that I know, 2 of the 4 are going to be doing everything in the best interest of your district. I only know the other 2 by reputation. I believe that'll be the same with all of them. There's no hidden agenda with them. So we'll try to talk a little bit about the Corbin stuff. Jody, again, is going to talk about the bylaws and whether it's written in bylaws or just some understandings with each other about how we're going to work as a board. And as I said, a couple have already said this evening that things are already starting to be a little different. The state, in their written expectations, I think focused as much on how the board acts as what you are doing. That they want to see a coalescing of people working together. And again, I'm not the one that judges that, but they're going to be looking at that and how effective you can be as a governing board. We'll talk a little bit about effective meetings, and we're going to set you up to do a board evaluation because that was, again, one of the expectations in writing by the state. This is a little different than the one we typically use with boards. The one we usually use with boards is something that's grid metric year to year to year. This is kind of a pre or post, and it's really going to deal with more, well, we're going to hold that till later, but it's really more how prepared are we as a board to function together? So this is more about you as a group than does the board have policy manuals? Does the board do this? Does the board do that? This is going to be more about when we work together, how do we see each other? And so that'll be something that we'll have for homework for the next session.
I just wanted to say very quickly, the commissioner says that it's a technical assistance team. That's what she calls it.
That's,
Just
and
for
and
clarification.
that's the one I wish I had remembered because that's exactly what they are. Okay. And again, this is what the state language said. Evaluation instrument that will be used at the initial training to assess your current functioning and to set up some goals for the future. We're going to give it out tonight and we'll have it back in that the beginning of our next session, we'll start by talking about that. And then hopefully from that, come up with a couple action steps that you might want to do to try to meet that. If you find that there's some shortcomings you want to address. But again, all this will do is help you identify what you think, and then it's up to you to come up. We'll help try to facilitate that, but it's really your ideas and it's your thoughts that are going to be the ones that are going to do something.
We're gonna get a copy of that.
Yes, I've got the PowerPoint. I've got copies of everything.
Just
that we're gonna-
that sentence that you just, that slide right forward. Yeah,
Jen sent us.
okay.
It's in the packet. It's in the,
All this.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, yeah.
it's not in the packet.
This is, it will be, it's in the PowerPoint and I have.
Well, we have it, that's okay. Thank you.
Okay. So, another thing, in fact, we can hand this one out right now. Again, stability head, Joe.
Yes, they're kind of shy for a while. Yes, you mentioned we're looking forward and not backward. And when we do this performance self-evaluation, from what date are we looking at evaluating ourselves? Because it's different from November to December.
It's not quite the same kind of thing where we look back or look forward. It's really your impressions of things. I'll go over this at the end.
Okay.
Just park it for now. This is just, again, something that, this was from Ellington, where they developed this as a community. And a lot of this stuff isn't just the Board of Education saying we have to talk about stability. Communities are doing that. And you might think about doing something like this, but bringing others into the fold, make it about the shared government in the community, for example. But I just shared this because, again, got to jump over here for a second. The state's looking at seeing stability, and I'm not judging, commenting, or anything other than they have observed a need for some improvement. So, and if you're doing that already, perfect. We can always do better. So I have to click in here so we can start. Yeah, if you just click in there, it should come up to the next screen, which will. That's not it. Did you try clicking just inside the?
Yeah, it goes to the next.
Okay, so. Mine, we're just gonna switch that one for a second. Yeah.
Go to.
I have a hard time adjusting to the technology, so my apologies. Okay, so, some of you have heard of the Lighthouse Project before. It's a program that was developed by the Iowa School Boards Association. The original research was about 20 years old now, but they look to determine where boards make a difference in terms of improving student achievement. Because up until then, there really wasn't any good solid research that looked at the effects of how boards operate compared to how students perform. And their study is still being referenced all the time. Out of that study, oh, we're not in, oh, here we go. Perfect. Thank you. Out of that study, they came up with a couple different things that they noted were very important. One was that there's specific conditions and beliefs that exist in high achieving school districts, regardless of the demographic of the student, regardless of the economic situation in communities. Some work harder than others, obviously, but that there's research shows that if boards act a certain way, there's a much greater likelihood of improving student achievement, and that's why we're all here. The other thing that they determined, and that's like weeks and weeks and weeks of workshops, and we couldn't get done in a year. We used to actually take 2 years to do this when we did it, the district. But the other thing they came up with is that there are 5 very specific roles that boards play in high achieving school districts. And it's a really good model for boards going forward. So again, instead of like, here's what the law says, here's this, here's your authority, here's not, you've heard that stuff before. We wanted to make this real, give you an idea of the potential if you do things a little differently, perhaps, that you can achieve even more. And so I want to go through this this evening. Boom. Okay, so wish I had a flip chart. Oh, well, it's too late. No problem. I want to talk about building a house for a minute because there's certain things you have to do when you build a house. And I'd love for you to sort of throw out some ideas. What are things that we need to do when you build a house?
You have a good foundation.
Foundation,
Stolen.
Design.
design, plans, sorry,
Framing,
framing, yeah,
Electrical, plumbing,
Installation.
walls.
all of that stuff. Yep, supplies, materials,
Budget.
budget, absolutely.
Then
Gotta have the land. Absolutely. So, you caught most of them. This is kind of my list. You start with your blueprints, you plan, construction plan is a little different. That's like a follow checklist, and I'm gonna go through that in a second. Having adequate materials, checking the work daily, communicating with your subcontractors, a lot of communication, and then, there's a learning curve. Now, I lived in New Jersey for a couple of years after college, and I came back up to Connecticut. And with some help from my folks, we decided we were going to build a house. We found this land dirt cheap. It's almost a pun. And we wanted to just build a basic starter home. So, my brother's wife's uncle built houses, and he actually built one for my brother, and he built it pretty cheap. So I went to him and I said, "Could you help us build a house?" He goes, "Why don't you do it?" I've never built a house before. He says, "You got all the resources available to do it yourself." So he gave me a set of blueprints for a house similar to the one we wanted, and it worked for us. He gave me a construction plan. It was a paper spreadsheet because they didn't have Excel back then. It was 1979, I think, when we started. And it had everything you needed to do to build a house, starting with purchase of land. It was, getting permits, site work, because you have to dig all the land away, put the foundation and put the dirt back. Cement work, every little component. And there was a column for what you wanted to do, calendar, like when you would do it, what's it going to cost. You could fill that thing out and know pretty much everything you had to do and when you had to do it. And I did that. We bought the land in August. I spent a month or so going through that list of hiring subcontractors and got it all together. We broke ground October 25th, I think it was. We moved in January, on January 30th. So just like 3 months, basically, two and a half months, nonstop. And the other advice he gave me was, back to communication, he said, you want to get a job really done well, show up every night when there's a crew on the site, show up with a couple 6-packs of beer, and they'll all do they'll do anything for you. And they did. I mean, it was amazing. We ended up by doing everything ahead, planning and organizing, getting everything lined up, materials, it was all ready to go. We just had to kind of push a button and it all started to happen. it went really, really, so we were only $1,500 over budget when we were done, and for building a house, that's nothing. The job was that, in fact, a lot of the contractors, because we spoke every afternoon, the mason, for example, I'll put up a chimney for $750. That's 1979 prices, but probably 10,000 now, but $750. He said, but if you give me 1,500, I'll make this whole wall really beautiful Roman brick. We'll put a heater on the fireplace, the whole bit. Because we were talking, he tried to listen to my needs. I explained myself to him. We got that. The upshot is, for a starter house, we were going to live in for about 5 years. We ended up staying in that house for 25 years because we got what we wanted the first time, because we did all the hard work up front. We're streaming here, aren't we? My brother built a house around the same time. They wanted to move out of that small house that they had, and his wife inherited some property. It was on a pond where I know somebody caught an 8-pound largemouth bass on there. So I couldn't wait for him to move in there so that I could be in his backyard every night. But now the difference was he went out to dinner with his wife's cousin, the son of the other builder. He built houses too. They sat at the table in the restaurant, and she sketched out on the napkin what she wanted the house to look like. You could probably see where this is going on. That was the plan. They talked about, oh yeah, well, we want this in this room, this in that room, but that was the plan. So, I show the picture of the framing in here. Here's an example of what he had to endure for this time. It took him almost a year to move into the house too, by the way. Walking around the brand new, he called me. They're framing the house. You want to come out and see it? So we went over there. We went to look at the house. And my brother's looking around and goes, something's off. He goes, where's the stairs into the basement? They didn't tell me you wanted stairs in the basement. My brother should have been in the Navy because he can swear like a sailor, but and he was right that night, that afternoon. That was just one example of dozens of them throughout the year. One day he called up screaming. They painted the house screaming yellow. I mean, not Camaro yellow. They're almost the chrome color yellow. Everything. When he finally moved in, we had Christmas Eve at his house. And again, they did not spare a penny. They put a lot of really nice stuff into it. They had this beautiful kitchen with 10-foot ceilings or 9-foot ceilings and all bit. But every time someone used the upstairs bathroom, you had to stop talking because there was a pipe coming out of the ceiling in the kitchen and then over to the wall. There's nobody had planned for plugging pipes to be in the wall. They sold the house within 3 years. So with all they put into it, and my brother could not tell you to even within $1,000 what he spent on that house. He has no idea what he spent on that house. That's the difference between working, planning, thinking through, holding yourselves accountability, checking with the work. How are we doing? And that's what we're going to talk about this evening. We're going to try to give you some ideas on how you can better hold people accountable, hold yourselves accountable, and make this stuff work. Keep losing focus, huh? Okay, so, and this is on. I'll figure this right here. But there's plenty to do. Everybody in the hands. And I mentioned the Lighthouse Project came up with 5 goals of the board. And what's interesting is that there are lots of different places that have organized, like there's the 8 characteristics of highly effective school boards. Franklin Covey has great boards, which has 5 components to leadership. The key work of school boards works off of 5 components. There's lots of people that have studied governance and leadership, and they almost look exactly the same in every case. The one difference is, while ours says setting clear expectations is number 1, vision, all of the things that we're going to goals as being the number 1 important thing. Franklin Covey says that the first important thing is to understand your roles, but the second one is having a clear vision. So we're going to walk through these individually and talk a little bit about what the impact is for you. And I'm trying to watch time because I know we started a little late. I want to make sure we have time to do the different things we're planning on tonight. So I may work through some of this a little faster. I'd rather everybody talk a little bit, but I want to make sure you get all the stuff that you need to hear. So But setting clear expectations. When I talk about expectations, goals, vision, any of those words that we talk about to express what we're looking for, I always use the word clear before I use the word. So it's clear vision, clear expectations, clear goals. And the reason I do that is because I've seen boards and I've done goal setting with boards dozens of times. You write these really fancy goals on the wall or wherever you put them, but then you have 9 board members with a different interpretation of what that goal means. And then you ask the superintendent, let's make this goal operational. Well, if 9 of you have a different idea of what success means, because you have 9 ideas on what the goal means, Dr. Avery's going to be pretty tired of trying to figure out how to satisfy 9 people when you have 9 opinions on what success means. And so it's really more important to spend that time clearly articulating what you expect. And even to the point when you vote on things, to say, before we vote, let's make sure we all understand that if we vote yes, this is what's going to happen. Or if we vote no, this is what's going to happen, so that we understand right up front. We want to make sure everybody's set up for success and not deliberately setting somebody up that, I can't possibly win this fight. And that's not going to work. And it doesn't allow you to get the things you want done, because that's the other part of this. This becomes operational. Holding the system accountable. We have to look at data. We have to, and we're going to go through each of these independently. So I'm just sort of setting them up. Are we looking at the data? Are we setting our expectations? Because part of that clear vision is what, this is what we expect. But a very important question is, how are we going to know? How do you know if we're going to get there? And how are you going to be able to tell us so that we know? We'll go through this again in a little more detail in a minute. Building public will. So many of the things we all have to do, and I was a board member for 10 years, so I went through this myself. So much that we try to accomplish, if we just go ahead and do it without involving our community, there's a greater likelihood they're not going to buy into it, that we need to have ownership in it. So how do we involve the public before there's a problem, so that they can help us be ready for the solution? Because too many boards will sit there and go, well, we had a problem, we had this. So the superintendent came up with a plan and we're voting on it tonight, but there wasn't any expectation from the community about, we didn't even know there was a problem. And we'll follow up on this a little bit more in a bit. And then finally, and they were pretty good at that. I've been out here a bunch myself over the last 3 years, learning together as a board team, a board superintendent team. And again, the question about Dr. Avery coming in, the more the team learns together, the more effective the team you can be. So I'm glad you're here. Because he needs to hear what you hear too. He needs to know and push back, frankly, if I'm saying something that doesn't work here in Bridgeport, because we can give you best practices. We can tell you what we think is the best way to doing something. But if you've got a way that's working better for you, fine, that gives us something to take back to other districts and share. First one, setting clear expectations. For the people that probably can't see this clearly on screen, how you doing on your unspoken objectives? By what? I'm referring to the goals I have in mind that I've never mentioned. How are those going? I'm totally nailing them. If you don't have clear goals, how do we know if we're getting them? Anybody can do anything they want. And well, I meant the goal. Maybe not. So you don't want to set yourself up for this kind of situation. So shared vision. That's your blueprint. Here's what we want to do. Typically, what a board is going to, and you're looking for goals that have systemic effect. Your superintendent will have more targeted goals, perhaps, but your need is to make sure that we set high expectations for the system. What can we do? Part of the conversation may involve when you have to start making cuts and the importance of every component of that district, so that we're balancing the needs all the way across the line as we go through. It's such a challenge to make decisions like that. My first year as board chair, and this was 1991, so this was a long time ago. Some of you may not have been born yet. We got hit with a 10% budget cut. Back then, there was no state law that said you had to hold targets and maintain at least a minimum from last year. We got cut 10% off a 0% increase. We laid off 10% of our teachers. We laid off every paraprofessional. We cut out all books. Library. We had just instituted a plan to rebuild our libraries books within 10 years. Then we were even more excited, we're gonna do it in 5 years than we did turn around and made it a 10-year plan because we couldn't do anything that first year. I understand how tough it can be, but we tried to make sure that whatever we did would not hold us back year after year, that we had to maintain the momentum that we were trying to have. I guess I might as well just wave, right? This is right off the sheet, so I don't need to read each one. You have them in front of you. But the idea is really more than anything, talking about we can do better, we must do better, and we have to communicate that with each other. We have particularly, and not just the board, amongst yourself, yes, your staff needs to know what you're thinking, and I'm sure many of them do. They watch your board meetings and you're at your board meetings, you're sharing what you're thinking. So getting them on board is really important, and we'll talk more about that when we get to that fourth item. I can't stress it over and over. I realize you're in a financial crisis right now. I know that. I can't envision trying to do the things we're doing. And frankly, unless there's some state intervention, I'm not talking about leadership, but I'm talking about money. I don't know how you do it. And I think they understand. I don't think they are willing to commit to it, but I think they understand it.
I guess, I know we're gonna go through this.
Yep.
And hopefully as we go through this, we're gonna talk about this, what you just said. Because I've heard this discussion for 25 years, longer in some ways.
40.
Well, no, my daughter started in 1993. I started working for the AFT Connecticut in 1989, 90. But here in Bridgeport, I noticed it's the role of the board on this up there, but it's the role of the board for improving student learning. Well, as Senator Austin said so clearly last week, and I know she's not always on our side, but in this particular case, she could not have articulated the conundrum or dilemma more clearly. How are we supposed to improve student learning when we don't have the resources to do it? And so, that's been the conundrum for decades. And I remember when none other than Fran Rabinowitz was superintendent here, and she was born and raised here in the Briar Patch. And before her, Paul Vallis. And Paul Vallis bought textbooks. They were cutting edge textbooks in math. They were proven within 2 years to not be cutting edge textbooks in math. But she was locked in to the contract for years thereafter. And we, therefore, as the district, were locked in financially. Meanwhile, we didn't have the money anyway to do anything. And that just continues to be the cycle of not only do we not have the resources, but we get caught in situations where our resources are squandered in bad ways, crippling us even further. And until we get out of that cycle of of economic dysfunction, you can't turn around and say, and then, in the hearing last week, at the end, I was listening to teachers all throughout that hearing testify about the teacher retirement fund. The teachers that do decide to stay in this system stay at their own cost. And so, I'm not sure that there's a magic formula that says teach better, teach in a way that nobody's ever thought of. And then we use a system that we can argue is not the right way to measure. So I just, within these parameters, I just want to say that I'm going to listen and we're going to have this discussion, but the State Department of Ed is asking us to come up with miraculous ways to perform sorry. I'll leave it at that.
No, And we aren't gonna solve that issue
In this training,
in this room
I got it.
tonight.
And that's also not our role to figure out that miracle.
But you're absolutely right, although part of it is to maintain what our priorities are, so whatever we have, it isn't us just
Yeah.
putting a patch on it or putting a Band-Aid on it. We have to figure out how, with all of that, there's no argument that some of that stuff has to take a priority right now. But we never want to lose sight of the fact that whatever we had, whatever we do right now, can't affect just tomorrow, that it has to affect 2 years, 5 years, 10 years down the road. And I'm hoping some of that will.
Which is why we were at that hearing on Thursday.
And the more people that do things like that, the better.
Yeah.
So, again, I don't want to go through this too much. The other place that we want to make sure that we're talking about reflecting expectations is in policy. And Jody's going to talk about bylaws tonight, but he will be also coming back and talking about policy, because that was another requirement of the state to have that conversation. You are under contract with CADE to have your total manual rebuilt. And actually, Jody will be talking about that later, so I won't steal his thunder, let him talk about it. So anyway, first, expectations, setting clear expectations, that's the first goal. And we are at some point in this training going to be talking more specifically about that, what that will look like here. We're not going to do that tonight, but we're going to set up for that in another one of the sessions. You'll be talking more about setting vision. Talk about, when you have a goal, who's it for, who's going to do it, what's the outcome, et cetera, et cetera. Those are things that you work in conjunction with your superintendent, who's working in conjunction with staff. Your big question, just like if you know Simon Sinek, there's the why, there's the how and the when. Making those others really are the superintendent's responsibility, but it starts with figuring out what do we really need, what is our why, what is it we have to do. In each of these, I'll give you more homework, Jody. Related to that 5 goals, we created a little worksheet. With each of these goals, we've come up with a question. And these 5 questions are something that you should ask for every time the board has something to consider. Starting with, what are our greatest hopes for this district? What is it we're expecting? If you're talking about reading, what do we expect to see out of reading? If we're talking about a new facility, what do we expect to see? What's the benefit of this? How are we going to do it? Really important question to ask, and it's the first one on the list. And so if you're debating or looking at a specific issue, you start with these 5 questions and you try to pinpoint what it is in each of these, starting with clear vision. Second one is create conditions for success. It's one thing to say, and you've heard me say, let there be light, how many school board members does it take to screw a light bulb? None. It's up to the board to say, let there be light. So the board says, let there be light. And then it's a superintendent's job to figure out, is it going to be incandescent, fluorescent, et cetera. But it's not enough to just say, let there be light. The superintendent is going to have needs to make that happen. Whether you need, you use the light metaphor, to the extent we need electricity, we need lighting, we need bulbs, et cetera, et cetera. But he's got to come back to you. If you want this to be done, here's what we're going to need to make it happen. And it is one of the obligations of the board. If we really want it to happen, we've got to come up with the resources to make it happen. There's actually, and you have to be an educator. He came out and, don't sit down, Jody. Wait, just wait.
You can just lean.
Just wait. So there's a gentleman who's really well known in education governance circles. His name is Richard Elmore. He's written extensively on school governance and school board. He actually helped with that Lighthouse study originally. And he came, and I say he had to be an educator because his attorney uses accountability. And that's a lot of syllables. Now it's working sometimes. Okay, reciprocity and accountability. Just 2 words to sort of supplement all of that you see in the writing is pressure and support. The board creates pressure by setting expectations. We set the goal, We expect results back in terms of reporting periodically. How are we gonna know what are we seeing? Help us understand. But the object of all that pressure is nothing if you don't also provide the support to do it. Creating that safe space to experiment. You know, Mr. Traeger, you were talking before about letting teachers come up with new ways of teaching. Well, if a district is so starved for resources, it might be a little hesitant to do that. So how do we think bravely? And maybe you can do it cheaper, as a matter of fact, but you have to create that environment that allows that. And sometimes that's the board that does it. The board says we don't want change, or we're not comfortable doing something without a lot of research behind it. That's what you're going to do. So part of it is being bold, being supportive of those initiatives. But it starts with make the connection for me. Here's what we wanted to do. Here's our vision. Here's how we plan on doing it. You've now expressed to us what we need to do to provide support for that. It all ties together. It's really not linear as much as kind of, I call it bird's nest. It's just all the pieces are combined and are interwoven with each other. Just really hard to talk about if you don't make it linear. But you have that equal and complementary responsibility that you have the capacity for what I ask you to do. Really important. This is also on your sheet. Basically, making sure that your board actions align with that. This is kind of the work of the board. You know, setting the vision, all those things set up for it, but the decisions you actually make day to day when you're talking about changing where the money gets spent or even creating that fiscal plan. I don't like using the word budget, an itemized estimate of expenditures, but whatever you want to call it, we need to align that. And that should also be part of our vision. So it's one thing that, and again, I know you're in a hard place right now, just trying to balance ones and zeros and things. But how do we make sure that that is aligned with our expectations? It's all based on that vision. By the way, I'm walking through this a little quicker because I don't want to spend the most time on this. I spent 3 hours doing this in Stanford last Saturday, so you can make this a much more interactive thing. And I'll try to get some places where we can talk more, but I want to get through this first. Then the big question you want to ask is second one on our little sheet. What are we willing to support to ensure the expectations are met? What are we willing to support? If you have this really high level expectation, but you know you don't have the resources, you have to think about, okay, what does that mean? Do we set it up for failure? Because if we don't have the resources, it will fail. Or is there another alternative? I'll give you an example of that from starting about 20 years ago. There was a district that every year they fought over whether they should have all-day kindergarten or not. And the folks that were thinking about money, it's twice as much money, literally. We need twice as many teachers, twice as many classrooms, et cetera. We can't afford it. And the other half of the board saying, but we know that if it's done well, and that's a big qualifier, it can cut back on remediation afterwards. There's a lot of things that it helps, especially when we talk about children needing to read by the end of third grade or in fourth grade. The more we can apply early, the better. So there are times when we want to get that stuff done. In this case, though, every year they proposed it, every year it failed. And for 10 years, they didn't have all-day kindergarten. But guess what? They didn't have anything else either, because that was their vision, was the kindergarten, not literacy, numeracy, et cetera. And the superintendent tried to break that cycle. So they actually did a retreat with all their administrators. I had the pleasure of facilitating that. It was really informative for me. But I started by saying, we're not here to talk about solutions today. We're here to talk about what the problems are. So if you say a solution, I'm going to stop you. I want to figure out what the actual problems are. So I opened it up to the floor, first hand up. Problem is we need all-day kindergarten. That's a solution. What's the problem? We need more time. Sounds like a solution. What's the problem? Took them about 45 minutes to an hour to figure out that it was literacy and numeracy. All the administrators in the room agreed that in our district, literacy and numeracy are the problem. We need kids with better math skills, better reading and writing skills. Wow. So now, because that became the focus, the board set a goal for literacy and numeracy. They didn't get all-day kindergarten for probably another 3 or 4 years, but they had literacy and numeracy programs from that day forward. So they started attacking the problem rather than getting caught up in a solution. So that's why I say, if your goal is to do something, it may mean we have to take smaller incremental steps. And again, that's the challenge to your superintendent, to bring you those ideas. You still shouldn't be talking about how we do this, what kind of teaching do we do, all that. Even if you're a classroom teacher in your day job, you shouldn't be setting curriculum and expectations in the classroom, but keeping that high level focus and let your administration do that work with staff. And the more inclusive that process is, the better. Can't do it without accountability. It's sort of leading through, what do we want to do? Do we have the resources for it? How are we going to know? In my mind, if I ever get back on the board, I'd love to do it when I retire, but that might be 20 years from now. The idea is that you have to help me understand what it is, how are we going to, first of all, what's the expectation, but how are we going to know? How will we know that if we implement this program, that the reading or math scores or whatever will achieve the goals or the expectations you've set in your proposal? And when will it be reported to the board? I want that right up front. I want to know that she's getting regular reports, and they don't have to be 45-minute detailed presentations. Might be part of the superintendent's report that night. Just want you to know we just got our back scores back, and we've had a 3 or 4%. We'll be talking about that later in the year when we give you a report on it. But we did have some success because of the decision you made. Or just as important, what happens if the decision we made it's not going really the way we expected it? Well, you shouldn't have a superintendent that's afraid to bring that news to you, because we're all working with the best intentions. If we messed up, I'll come back to you and say, this isn't working the way we want. We'd like to adjust it a little bit. Are we okay for that? So that we have this blame-free zone, and we can talk about, because I've seen too many districts where if they know they're going to get beat up for giving you bad news, they're just not going to give you bad news. I was working in one district, which was an alliance district. We went in and showed them some of their data, and one board member looked at it and said, I've been on this board 20 years. Why didn't I know this until now? Because the superintendent was afraid to give information that if they had addressed it, might have helped kids for that last 20 years. So how are we going to know? You really want to get to, well, I sort of stole my thunder. You want to create a blame-free zone. You want to use data. And we didn't have this in our plan, but we could come back and talk about how to look at data more effectively as a board. What does a board need to look at? We've done that for a number of years. Back to your sort of pressure and support, monitoring progress regularly. And again, that's really an important part of being a board, is not just saying what there be like, but help us understand, did we get the lumens that we wanted? Remember when I was on a building committee for a school, we had the committee toured the school just before it opened, and one committee was, look at those light fixtures, they're really ugly. Can we do something about this? A wire exposed? And I just don't think. But another person who was an educator in her day job walked around and going, look how well lit this room is. Look how even the lighting is. I can put a piece of paper down on this desk and there's no glare. Who do you want it to be when you're looking at the results of a project like that? At your level, it should be, do we have an environment that's conducive to learning, or are there issues with that? If we get tied up in the way the light fixtures work, we may get bogged down with things that really aren't necessary. Sledgehammer or flashlight? What do we want data to be? Do we want to illuminate what we're doing? Do we want to be able to shine a light on the things that need to be shined up? Or do we want to beat somebody up so bad? I have had superintendents on numerous occasions say, my administrators will not present to the board. They refuse, because they know they're going to get beat up when they stand up in front of the board. And that's not a place you want to be. You don't want to be that board. Nothing says you can't ask tough questions. Nothing says you shouldn't push back, holding them accountable. Pressure and support. But how you go about doing that can have a profound influence on whether they're going to bring you the stuff that they need to hear. My favorite question. Again, I'll go on the board just to ask this question every time if I need to. But I would say, and hopefully what happens is, as you keep asking these questions, administration says, oh, you know what? Anytime I present to the board, I know they're going to ask these questions. So I'm going to answer before I even walk in the room. They'll be answered in the presentation every time. I'm going to share another document in a few minutes that does something similar to that. I did bring it. Okay. What we'll accept is evidence of progress. So we want to know, and we want regular reports on these things. And we ask for that up front. we'll get a report on this in 6 months, 1 year, or every 6 months thereafter, whatever makes sense for that particular initiative. Building public, you can't do any of this stuff if your community is not behind you. You just can't. But what do we have to do to make sure that the community supports this? About 7 years ago, I think it was, I noticed on the front page of the Hartford Courant, back when they had a newspaper, instead of just online. There was an article on the front page that said Hartford was closing, I'm going to say 17 schools. It was part of a plan. It was all, this was the final result. The board voted to close. I'm going to say 17 schools. It may have been a few less than that, but I think it was 17. Not one outcry. Not one group got up and started screaming about closing all these schools. And that's unusual because usually we have our neighborhood schools. And I know you've been dealing with some of that here. But they did all of the work up front. They got the community involved. They didn't go to the community and say, we studied this. We have half-empty buildings. We can't equate the amount of money into the facilities. We'd rather put it into teachers. So they did all that work up front. They had community members involved, and they didn't say, we think this is the way to go. They said, help us solve this problem. Here are the things, the challenges we have. Let's work together and come up with it. They could have written that report on day one, and it would have probably looked almost exactly to what they got. But they recognized that the community was either going to own it or they were going to hate it. And they chose they wanted them to own it, and they did. And they got it done with no outcry whatsoever. So that's an example of where we use our community, we help them. You know, we use the 3 I's when we talk about community involvement. Most people never get past step 1, inform. We use social media, we use press releases, we use our communication. It's all one way. We're disseminating information. We've got great schools. We just passed this test. We got an award-winning program in arts, whatever it might be. But all our communication is one way. And the research shows that when we involve people, that we have the feedback as part of the initial discussions, focus groups, whatever you might use, you get a better product and you get more ownership. I've seen too many superintendents go through all the work. And they work really hard. They come up with a plan that is the right plan, but they spring it on everybody and then immediate pushback. We all reject change if it's imposed on us without any impact, without any say. So and this is probably where the board has the most impact, that if you communicate collectively as a group, to get people to understand what you're doing, why it's happening, and get that feedback, you're in much better shape. And then invest in, because good communication isn't, so, too many districts, well, in the smaller districts, it might be the high school principal knows a couple of reporters. They're sort of our communications person, or the middle school media person is really good at websites. So they're going to handle the social media, but they're not professionals. And the communication is so sophisticated now. You just look at the way, especially with all the disinformation that gets out there on a daily basis, we need clear communications that is professional. So it might be that you have, and I know this is a tough thing to say when you're dealing with money issues, but if you're not investing in communication, and I'm not talking tons of money, but you might need in fact, assuming you have somebody in Bridgeport that handles communications. But even too, do your building principals, have they ever received any professional development in communication? Because that's a skill they need. Does your superintendent feel the need to, I might want to touch that up, maybe take a course or something to get better at it. But be cognizant that the more we know, the better we can be. So how do we invest in some of this stuff to make it happen? Creating awareness of the need. We want people to understand we have an issue, not we have a solution. We start with what's the problem, get people to help solve it with you. A word that if we had time, we would have spent more time getting words. Urgency comes up a lot. We have to create a sense of urgency. I can't think of a community that has a greater need or sense of urgency than yours in terms of the needs and all the things. How do we communicate that in a way that people will come in and support us? You have to give people a chance to feel hope that there is a solution, that we can make this happen. If we all like mind and want to work hard together, then we can make a difference. And in all of these things, there's a component in every one of these that aligns with policy, because in this case, for example, do you have policies on good communications? Do you have policies on looking at data? Do you have policies on, your role as a provider of resources? I'm sure you have many of these, but when's the last time you looked at them? Well, I know Jody's gonna be looking at them, so we are. Absolutely. The question you're asking is, what will we need to do to gain community support for this work? And back to our worksheet, if we're going down the line when there's a proposal and we're answering these questions, it's gonna help us focus what we need to do. Then finally, learning together as a board team. I cannot say, anything bad about the fact that I have been asked to come out here. I think this is my 16th. Oh, I'm sorry. It'll be 14 soon. But you're looking for professional development for the board, for the team. And the more because when you're getting that support collectively together, it's a better experience for everybody, and you get to walk away from this all hearing the same things and all sort of hopefully coming to some similar conclusions. You've been doing this, establishing learning time, working together. I don't know in terms of opportunities because a lot of what we've been doing is me coming out talking about stuff. But where you have some sessions where you just sit down and maybe there's a facilitator. I love doing that kind of work where I keep my mouth shut and encourage you to talk to each other. Those are the conversations that can help move the school district forward when we start to see common ground with each other. And be willing to lead, but also allowing others to lead. That our job is to create a good leader creates other leaders and works collaboratively. And when it's time to follow, you follow. One of the things, Jody, I'll let you talk about the policy stuff. I was just going to say there's a sort of a expectation of deliberative policy development. We're not writing policies to satisfy state legislation or, something else that policies, we got to rewrite it. But when we have intentions, when we have a vision for something, how do we codify that in policy so that it remains after we're no longer on the board? And simple question, but what information does the board need to ensure the right decisions are made? How are we going to, what do we need to know? What is it we need to know? Doesn't hurt to, or if one of you has an idea, maybe we should have a workshop on this or that. Share it and talk to the chair and say, maybe we should do this. And it's Kate, somebody else. There are lots of places you can get professional development from, but to see if you can continue on that, you're governing a learning environment. So why not also set an example and be a learning team? So in a way, blueprints, the plan, construction plan is, the way we articulate it. And also providing the resources. So that's that continuity or accountability. Checking the work daily. There must be an analysis. There must be assessment from time to time. The district's doing it all the time, and you don't need to see every single test result because that can be overwhelming and it allows for micromanaging sometimes. But to know, I really want to know more than anything that my administrators are looking at that data and they're informing instruction through what they learned from that data. Not necessarily that we need to know all that, but we do have to have enough of an understanding that those assessments are being done and they are affecting how children are learning in the classroom. You've got that sheet. You've got that sheet. And the other one I'm going to give you right now. This was developed as part of Lighthouse as well. A lot of it was done in Iowa, but we all take any of the Lighthouse documents and embellish them. This back page is really the part that's most important. The front page just explains it. But what I often hear is board members say, I got a presentation on this, but then we spend 15, 20 minutes, an hour asking questions. And sometimes I always ask the same questions. Some board members have a certain thing that they're always trying to understand before they vote yes or no. So this is a way of codifying, in this case, 7 questions, and you'd have the option of doing making your own or using something like this. but the administration gets a copy of that, and they tell everyone who's gonna present to the board, these are the 7 questions that are gonna be answered in every presentation. Doesn't mean you have to bury people with data, but that, with, and these are samples. You could say that I like these, this is what we want to use. You might say to maybe the policy committee, we want to change a couple things around. But the idea that everybody, there's no secrets, there's no surprise. We know we're going to ask these questions every time. And it helps your administration because they're not, in some cases, frustrated. They know you ask the same question every time. In this way, not here, right? So I take that as a tool that you can use. I think it does help boards function a little more easily during board meetings, because those are things you don't have to constantly be harping on. Now, before we could get, I'm sort of stuck on a time thing because we have another hour and a half roughly. In this first section, any takeaways, anything that you think needs more exploration or waste of time? What's some feedback? This is never a shy group. Hold on, really stubborn. I'm not gonna say anything more until I hear somebody say something.
Something about,
Just feedback on what we just went over. Helpful, not?
I think it's duplicative as we've heard this before. And it hasn't been done. At least for this initial part of the training section. And we haven't done that. We have this critical failure.
I think that everything that you talked about is necessary. And I understand the blueprint, but without like a bare minimum line of respect for one another, that's what I think the challenge is with through and, kind of carrying out what it is that you just spoke about. So that's.
So just one of the expectations of the state was that you come up with this evaluation that we're going to talk about at the end of the session for your homework, but that from that you develop some plans or some action items, which could very well be some continuation of a conversation about how we get there. Because I think everybody would agree that the way things have been doesn't necessarily sustain.
Oh, I think, as I said at the first board meeting, when we were asked up in January to meet with you, members of the State Department of Ed, for what we thought was going to be a friendly discussion. I spoke to the assistant, I think, or deputy superintendent. Blanking on his name right. Moving in a more constructive. And so we were not for the last year had begun to take the steps necessary to move us in that direction, and believe that we are now moving in that direction and having more constructive meetings and beginning to take those steps. I spoke to him again at the second full board meeting. He himself had watched the videos of our meetings and understood my comments. And that was the gist of my statement to the full board, was that we had taken steps to correct the problems and thought we were addressing the needs. This will be helpful, but we are already moving in that direction. So that's where we're hoping to go.
But I'm gonna need the one that says effective meetings next. Okay, was this, a waste of time for you tonight? Just checking, because, I'm trying, I didn't want to just go, state law says you have this and you have to do this, and I'm trying to make this get beyond the bare minimum and start talking about what boards do that are really making changes.
I don't think with Carlos, you wasting time. You're here to help us. Everybody need help. It's like how we doing baby step. As a father, I know everybody's here that is a parent. We show and we learn and we help our kids grow up, right? Not because we got a title position or you're in college, you got a degree, doesn't mean you know everything. We will have to listen, have to learn from others, you know. And the most important, like I would say, listen others. You can learn and help others. So for me, it's amazing. I'm listening to you just because I didn't say nothing and just get all your information. You know me for so many years and I like to listen. So it's great. You're doing this for us because, you know, we need to learn. We have to understand. We have to communicate and we need to respect each other. That's why we got elected for the community. They trust us. So same way, you know, you trust us, we trust you, but we try to do the best we can for this.
You did, well, please.
I was just about to say, I agree with Mr. Benahan. I don't think anybody around this table thinks that this is a waste of time for you or for us. I think that we are all different people. We process your information different. And if we may not have anything to say right now, you know, things will definitely come up throughout your presentation. So just because we're quiet right now, and just for me, like being on the board for the last 2 years, for the ones that have been on here as long as I have, I've noticed that, you know, the information is processed and then questions will flow, you know, along the presentation. So I agree with Mr. Benahan, definitely not a waste of time. I think that everybody's here because they want to be here. And I personally welcome the help of the state of Connecticut. I really want to know what are other districts doing around the state that's working? You know, what are they doing that's working and what we can incorporate, you know, to curtail it to what Bridgeport needs. So definitely not a waste of time.
There's 10 of us in the room and for me, the Bible says there's wisdom in the council of many. So no one here, I think, is a unuseful tool, including you gentlemen. But this is definitely helpful, and I see a lot of things that can be highlighted. I think that we can actually implement now. And I'm hopeful, and I'll always stay hopeful. But it's just for me to be able to build something, it needs that foundation. And sometimes we need to get to the basement to get things out before you rebuild, because then you have the same stench in the bottom. And it's that thing, you know, there's a saying out there that one bad apple spoils the bunch, you know, but I don't think that we're in this room whatsoever in every capacity in this room that we're not useful tools for this process. It's just a matter that we see ourselves as a useful tool and we give ourselves an opportunity. And I think that one might be something that we got to rate ourselves honestly, that we haven't been useful for each other. And that will be something that we can all see that we can grow as a unit, as a board, and also as a district. How can we use ourselves, you know, for our talents? Because every single one of us has a talent, has a gift. And until we realize that we can be useful for each other and put that in the table, I don't think it's going to be harder to process until we get those people out and new people come in that are willing to do that work, that kind of work, to use each other for our best of our abilities, you know, because we're all useful in this table, in this group. I believe that wholeheartedly. It's just a matter of trusting each other and wanting to say, let's move forward.
As far as wanting to be here, I wish we didn't have to be here. But since we are here, we'll take full advantage of it. And I think it is very beneficial, even though some of us may have heard the information before or hearing it for the first, second time or whatever have you. I think it's very important for the accountability piece. There's a lot of people watching us now, so the public is tuning in right now, learning what boards should do, and then they can hold us accountable later on down the line. Because ultimate accountability is to the people who elect us.
Well, I just wanted one small caveat to that, because unlike other municipal officials, your primary charge is to implement the educational interests of the state. So sometimes that interest doesn't necessarily dovetail with the interest of the community. And so that's a dilemma, because if you feel I don't want to do things that'll harm my community members, and yet you are obligated to do something to satisfy the state, that's part of your job as a board, to balance the two and figure out how do we make this work the best we can.
Right, and that goes to the communication piece. If you communicate with your constituents and build a level of trust with your constituents, they'll be more apt to have the buy-in if you include them in those conversations and why it's not in the best interest.
It's interesting you mentioned that point about we're here to facilitate what the state wants us to complete as a task, but yet that set forth mandates that they don't fund. And this is one of the biggest things that we're gonna do, the elephant in the room again, besides the one that you have in front of you. That's the issue, you know what I mean? And then you have people making statements as, maximizing what you have when you got great advocates that literally state, well, you can't maximize something that you already are short. I need $100 to pay my bills. I only have 90, but then somebody's telling me, do this. Can I borrow 10? I'm already short 10 to pay my bill. How am I not going to give you 10 when I'm already short? And that's the predicament, that we're in as far as Bridgeport is concerned. So it's crazy that we got it. And I've never heard that statement before. So that's an interesting thing that you said. We're here to do what state is calling us to achieve. But yet they don't give us a material, like you said in your slide, the material to build a house. We're going 4 states, so forth.
Yeah, I want to agree with Ms. Casimir on this, I think this is useful information, even if we had it before. We talked about, looking at what other districts were doing that are doing well so that we can kind of, we don't have to reinvent the wheel here. There's districts doing things really well. Let's see what we can do to curtail it to what we need, but also, actually not sit here and do a training again, but actually implement what we're doing. So, my take from this is I'm processing, like you said, a little longer, but it's because I'm also thinking about how we're going to start implementing this before July 1st. Just because we have these trainings doesn't mean we're going to hold off everything. And then after July 1st, we need to start doing this stuff now.
Mhm.
And so, that's where I am right now. I'm taking all this information in, and also just because we've had this training before doesn't mean that, we've done anything with it. And that's what we have to do now, is do something with it.
One of the things that, and Jen, you and I talked about this, that there's a potential that these are the 6 mandated trainings, but if the board finds that this is a particular area they want to follow up on in more detail, we can do that too. So, and it might be that maybe it's after July 1st when you've finished all this, but to continue this work, and that's when you can start having conversations about, okay, how are we going to do this? How are we going to do that? We're
Great.
now that you can always pick up the phone and respond. So we do the best we can. I'm going to segue. Oh, Robert's rules. One. But I mentioned earlier, there's 3 things we were going to try to accomplish tonight. One was sort of the rough overview and a different perspective of the role of the board. Secondly, there was a request by the state to talk about effective meetings and Robert's rules. I don't want to focus too much on Robert's rules because Robert's rules is designed to help the flow of business, but Robert's rules can also interrupt the flow of business if it's used in a different way. And I think it's more important that we talk about why it's important that our meetings run smoothly and sort of some of the discussion about that. We can talk a little bit more about Robert's rules if necessary, but, you know, and I've observed a couple of your meetings, you know, and sometimes the argument about whether something is in order or not becomes more, it takes control of what we were trying to accomplish. And so I think starting with the idea that the meeting is to help us get our work done. And if we're going to get into, even if we're right, is it worth all of the fighting to get a point, get that credit for having the right point? Or is it more important that we use these rules, this procedure to allow the work to get done? Because at the end of the night, somebody's going to probably feel angry because I lost or I won, or I felt I lost or I won. Someone might feel better, but did we get the work done that was supposed to get done? Do we find ourselves stuck again? We have to do it next meeting. So I want to talk a little bit about meetings in general and kind of what the purpose of them are to get us started in that conversation, if that's okay. So even though it says Robert's Rules of Order, we're going to be talking about meetings. And we'll start with good old Mark Twain. Well, it's attributed to Mark Twain. I've never seen a direct quote. School boards are groups that take hours to produce minutes. And that's been around a long time. And unfortunately, I've seen that happen a number of times. So simple, but why do the Bridgeport Public Schools exist?
Teach our children.
Teach our children.
To produce the next generation of functional adults into society, not just merely teaching them, but actually being prepared to actually make a living, an actual lifestyle, not live in poverty, not to continue the cycle of relying on public resources. You know, education here is supposed to prepare the next generation to overcome whatever their parents' obstacles were and actually prepare them for generational wealth and actually becoming somebody. That's what any school district exists to do when it comes to it. What do Bridgeport Public Schools exist? I won't say my honest answer because we're live in public, but I don't feel like we produce that goal for our students here at Bridgeport. Instead, we produce a working class for Fairfield County, and that our kids are set up to fail. And it shows in the data.
I used to say that my idea of what school districts are supposed to do is creating the next generation of school board members. Because although this board was kind of unique, because usually when I start, I say, you know, why do you want to run for the school board? And most people say, I had a great education, I want to pay it forward to the next generation. But when I was here in Bridgeport, I heard a lot more of, I went through the Bridgeport Public Schools, I had a bad experience, and I don't want that to happen to the next generation. And I heard that from a few of you. So that's a different response, but it's urgent, and it's more urgent. And so the idea of lifting everyone up, and it's super critical. Anybody else?
To build, like kind of she said, to build the next generation, to build the community economically, to develop, better leaders for our community.
So next question, why does the Bridgeport Board of Education exist?
To educate our children to be better leaders for tomorrow, for the future of our city.
Support and trust in the superintendent, the one employee that we hired to move whatever vision and goal that we have forward.
We want to go beyond the simple, and I'm happy to do that. Having listened to broader answers, the job is to teach our children. The school system is to teach our children so that they can thrive and succeed in our society and realize their dreams, as all children should be allowed to do in our society. That's what a public education is to me. And so our job is to ensure that that happens.
We exist as a body to to bring education forward in our community. That's why we exist. I read it again and then I kind of like, wait a minute. That's why do we exist? And we were elected to do this job, to move the district's education platform forward to the next generation.
Which are your answer back, right back answer, to carry out the education mandates of the state.
Part of it, that's, in their eyes, that's the most important part of it. I don't think that, if that was all it was, I don't think we'd need school boards. You know, that you could have people, paid employees, get those directives and make them happen. The difference is that if you want to bring on all these these aspirations that you've been talking about, that's why boards exist. And, you know, periodically over the years, there's been moves to say we really don't need school boards to get in the way, they're part of the problem, et cetera, et cetera. And yet there's quite an amount of evidence in the last 5 or 10 years that's been done. A lot of people going for graduate degrees do these research projects and they find this stuff, but that school boards can make an incredible difference. They don't always make an incredible difference, but they can make an incredible difference. And so whenever there's an outcry that, you know, it's an anachronism, it's just outdated, et cetera. The research seems to say the opposite, that without a board of education really leading and governing, you can't have that stuff. So, you know, you're stuck in this morass because there's this money problem and it's kind of hanging out there over everything. And yet to be able to govern and even if it's one step forward, 2 steps back, but at least we're taking that step forward. That if you keep doing that, maybe then it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but then you have to be unrelenting in your energy and your passion to do this work. And that's a word that's not always used, but the best school board members have passion for their work.
One of the big reason, as you said, that question, why does the principal board education exist? Because the parents. Because without parents, we're not be here. I feel the parents out there, they want our, you know, us work very hard, the whole team, like more education to be sure our students have good, you know, present in the future to be ready, you know, because without parents, you know, they're the one that elect us. They're the one to be trust us to be sure, you know, we can give, you know, help and give whatever we have to do to our children get successful. So I'm always saying, you know, without parents, we cannot go keep forward.
So now we go to a logical question from there. How do you do your work? What's the vehicle by which the Bridgeport Board of Education does its work? Chuck?
Sitting at a board meeting, researching before the board meeting.
Meetings. Absolutely. But that's a good point too, doing the research ahead of time. Before electronic agendas, we all had the board packet. And I don't know if you ever noticed, but board packets are usually glued shut. They seal the envelopes. You know why they do that? Because at the beginning of school board meetings, very frustrating sound, opening up that board packet after the meeting. It's people, and your staff works hours to prepare for a board meeting. To put those packets together is an incredible amount of work. Your central office basically stops dead for a day or two before a board meeting or subcommittee meeting for that matter. It takes a lot of effort to prepare for a meeting. They have to orchestrate it. They have to figure out who's going to present when, how long is it going to be. It's not something that we just throw everybody in the room and say, let's make it happen. There's a lot of preparation. And if you don't even prepare and do that research, read the packet, we end up not doing anybody a favor, because then we had one guy who never read the packet, and every time he'd ask questions that were answered in the packet. And the rest of us are sitting there for an extra hour at a meeting. And finally, this guy, Jim, who's a friend of mine on the board, he finally got to the point, if you read your packet, you would have known that. And he said it every single time. And after a while, I guess he shamed the person into starting to read the packet. But really, really important to approach the meeting, because that is the place where you do the important work of the district. So what is a meeting? Simple as start. What's a meeting?
Assembly of a quorum discussing business of the board.
It's a group of people getting together. In this case, if you're going by the legal definition of a meeting under Freedom of Information forum, posted meeting, et cetera, et cetera. So there are rules governing when and where you can meet, and what you can talk about in some cases. But, it starts with, we have,
Oh, go ahead.
we have this requirement or this need to make decisions. And so that meeting is where we make our decisions.
Yeah, it's just focusing on the business of it. Just the achievement. Not sure why you use the word achievement versus business.
Well, a lot of boards never talk about student achievement. They meet,
I got that.
Okay.
I understand that and thanks. We suffered that problem the past year. But. Yeah,
Past 2 months.
yeah,
There was a major achievement.
so. Okay, it was last year. But the business, because the budget's another aspect of it. And I
Absolutely.
wouldn't call that an achievement.
but that's part of that obligation to provide the resources, what are we
Well,
willing to do?
I understand that's part of our duty by law. So I'm just saying, I wouldn't,
But the public's perception of the work you do is really focused primarily through what observing your meetings. I mean, they see the results in the votes if they read the agendas or the minutes, for example, but the public display of your work is your meetings.
I agree, but as you use just the word achievement, I would have said business, focusing on business of the board, which would include achievement and budget and whatever else.
Yeah. But again, if we kind of go back to that first presentation, the boards that have the most influence on student achievement make that the focus of the meeting. The business is
Don't
there to
disagree.
support that.
Don't disagree.
Okay, okay. How do you, what's the roadmap for your meeting?
Agenda.
Agenda. Most important thing that you've got in a meeting is the agenda. The purpose of the board meeting is to complete the agenda. I mean, ultimately, that's really what you're supposed to do.
On that note, if in the agenda you're not talking about, it's not like to talk about achievement, then you can't talk about achievement because the agenda rules what you talk about in the meeting, correct?
But you can put specific things regarding achievement on the agenda.
That's what I'm saying. If it's not in the agenda, you can't speak about it. You have to put it on the agenda. That's
Which create a whole blueprint to get.
exactly, that's our blueprint, that's our guide. So if you put it as a subject, we got nothing else but to talk about it. That's my,
Every line item on an agenda is tied to achievement. Why are we voting on this business item is tied to achievement. So whether it's a professional development, because individuals are behind or it may be helpful, that's all tied to student achievement. And so when the board isn't asking how does this relate, if they don't see that to student achievement, that opportunity for discussion is always there to discuss how it will impact student achievement. Why are we voting for this new online curriculum tied to achievement? What's our current test status? So it's really, everything is focused on achievement. It's really a successful board that's going to ask the question that ties into it and does the research to know the history of it. So every item is focused on achievement. Why do we need to buy this new online program? How much is it going to cost? How much impact will it have? How many students will it impact? What's the data on it? How many students have used it? Have their test scores gone up since using it? What's the feedback from the parents and family? But if the board is not actively focusing on achievement and asking questions tied to that, it doesn't seem like it's a tie to student achievement at all, but just business. So I agree with the identification of focusing on achievement. I just would emphasize student achievement.
I think the emphasis is the important part. I know board chairs that, Gary Brochu, who has been an attorney for a number of years, was the chair of the Berlin board. And he worked with the superintendent, but nothing goes on the agenda unless we can make a direct connection to student achievement. And yes, that's a goal. And sometimes there are things that have to filter through that maybe are a building issue, whatever. To Christine's point, you still can make the reference to this is how it impacts achievement. But that was the focus of the board. And I guess back to the argument, if you want to be that board that is rising above just paddling against the tide, that's one way to do that, by focusing and asking those questions that Christine mentioned. You know, how does this connect? Draw the lines for me so that I understand it, because if I don't, if I can't make the connection to how it helps kids, that's what's going to trigger me to say, maybe this isn't worth having at the board table.
And that's where you get into the comments you made earlier regarding data as the searchlight, right? So meetings, you would expect that there'd be board meetings that aren't just simply adopting the textbook, but you're getting data back from the math department on the student assessments, and what it means, and for you to be able to ask questions about how that data connects to the book itself. And did you make the right decision? Are there other decisions you need to make as a board to facilitate that continued achievement and growth?
Since you think it's part of your the questions had is some things that are literally aligned to that, like, you know, to that thing. So that's an interesting thing that I think that good tool in the sense that, oh, we can implement this exactly right now. And it's one way to get that moving forward.
Absolutely. You could just
Wow.
adapt, you know, share that with Dr. Avery. Well, he's got it. But just to say, we'd love to see this start to get implemented, and he's going to work with his administrators these are how we're going to start preparing for board meetings. But it's maybe this should say emphasis on achievement rather than focus on achievement. I'm not sure if semantics, but
And student achievement.
it's, yeah. And then in terms of some issues around me, try to highlight a few. I don't want to lose the time with Jody because one of the expectations state as we should have a conversation about your bylaws tonight. I want to be very funny.
And again, my time will could just be 20 minutes because we're not going to
Go line by line.
go over your bylaws tonight. The idea tonight is to look at what it says about your bylaws. My immediate assessment of your bylaws, first of all, they're in place since 2019. You are better than 90% of the districts in Connecticut regarding having updated bylaws. Adopted February 13th, 2019. No?
2023.
2023.
The ones that are posted online are.
Okay, so you are top 100% of districts in Connecticut that have updated bylaws. So,
But that begs the question,
so the,
because you thought you had the most current copy.
And he does it.
Well, obviously, part of his review of the plan is whatever he gets going to be 2025, but it's going to be based on something that we already exist.
so we're gonna figure out, again, we're not gonna do it tonight, we're gonna figure out what ground level is. We're engaged with a policy update, custom policy update. If I could just take like 5 minutes, I can give it right back to you, but just, since you mentioned it.
Yeah.
So.
Can I just finish this other discussion first? When you have a meeting, if you are focusing on achievement, emphasizing achievement, if it's not on the agenda per se, does it make it old business or under the superintendent's report, we can ask questions about that? If an item has been passed, if you have, and you want to know more about, say, you know, I haven't heard anything in a while about this matter that we passed in October. Can we just ask?
The short answer is yes. There may be some question as to how the line of communication, because every district's a little different. But that's a valid question for a board member to ask is, where are you? You know, and we did it now, but again, if we're doing this the way I'm envisioning it, when we passed it, it said we're going to get reports quarterly, 6 months, a year, whatever. Then your job as a board member, say, I'm just reminding us that we said we were going to have this report. So you're holding people accountable at the same time, you know, trying to allow for that conversation. The process and procedure shouldn't be so stilted that a board member can't call the board chair and say, we haven't done this in a while. Can we get a future agenda item that does such and such? And then she's working with Dr. Avery on the agenda. That should be sort of a natural thing. Now, it might be that particular day that isn't ready yet. So but we will put it on an agenda in April or, you know, so you plan ahead. But in some boards actually have a calendar and they put right on the calendar, we're going to get a report on special ed every third meeting in April, or we're gonna have a report on, teacher evaluations in July. So that we start to plot out, not only for us, but for our administration's sake, so they're not, because if every time there's a meeting, someone says, well, what's this, what's that? He can't plan. But if you start to say, I'd like to follow up on this, and with the understanding, maybe it won't be the next meeting, but it might be a quick 5 minutes. We'll be preparing something in more detail at a future meeting, but just, this is where we are, 10 seconds, a minute. But the idea that you're focusing on results, the superintendent is focusing on results, we have better conversations.
Mhm.
And that's part of, I think, the protocols and the 9,000 series where we start to talk about what's that chain of command look like? What's that chain of communication gonna look like? You're nodding a lot.
No, I mean, but there's still a lot of greatness in all of that. And I'm saying until we get things worked out, you're never gonna be able to do any of that because everybody's all over different places about what they want. They want what they want when they want it. And it just has to be done, but there's no time to get everything done because everybody wants what they want when they want it and they want it now.
Well, here's something, and this might be a question that you put in your back pocket, although it has to be used judiciously. Is that the will of the board? Because if you have 9 board members and they're all calling you, I want this, I want that, I want this. Especially if it's not just a quick response, or if it's, I'll just have, Danielle send something out to you. It might be, this is going to involve research. It's going to involve some work. It's okay for you to say, you know what, why don't you talk to Jen? We'll talk about putting it on the agenda. And if the board votes for that to happen, it'll become my work. And that's a message really for the board as much as to you, because they need to understand that I shouldn't have the ability to just walk in and say, drop everything, I want this. Some superintendents, it's a board member, I got to try. But that's not fair to the superintendent. It's not fair to the work that you're trying to get done, because he's got to, I used to be a plumber and I could plan my first call every day. My second call never went as planned because an emergency came up, something else happened, and I had to stop doing what I planned on doing to do something else. Every time you make a phone call and ask for something, that's a disruption. Somebody's toilet overflowed.
Yeah. Me as a board member person, I know I ask you for things, but if there's something I ask for that it's cumbersome, it's not fingertip ready or something like that, and you don't have the capacity to do that without sacrificing some other work, I would be acceptable to an answer that's more than I'm ready to do right now. It's gonna take away from other resources. If it's as he says, the will of the board, and bring it on the agenda, and then we could discuss it as a board, and if it's important enough to the board, maybe not important enough to you at that time, which is acceptable. There could be disagreements, but 5 or 6 members of the board find that piece of information we want to move on immediately or whatever have you, then you take it directly from the board, not from me, just directly asking you for a piece of information that's hard for you to get. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. But it doesn't work that way though. It makes sense, but it doesn't work that way. So I'm just.
That's quite.
Well, again, we're talking about creating some bylaws down the road, and that may be one that needs to be looked at a little bit. What's the need when you need something? What's the line that you can't cross or can be reminded that's the line? And I can't do that. And sometimes it's an example, district years ago, a board member who had no experience in healthcare, by the way, put in a request for the superintendent. I want a copy of every nurse's incident report for all of our 8 elementary schools for the last 6 months. Now, that information would have to be redacted, first of all. I mean, you can't share student data, health information, or any of that stuff. So it would all have to be redacted. And and they had a weird policy that said any request for information had to be followed up within, I think it was 2 weeks. So it couldn't happen. So I ended up going on a Saturday to talk with the board about that because it blew up. And finally, they acknowledged that, one, he didn't have the right to do that because it wasn't a piece of paper that existed that you could just ask for. Somebody had to do research. Somebody had to do all this work. And that's when the board came up with that ground rule that anything that involved anything more than something already in existence had to go through the board. Now, here's the thing that made it kind of real to me. he actually had a good point. They had really bad budget time. They were cutting everywhere they could. So they said, we have 8 elementary schools. Why don't we have 4 nurses? We'll put them in the morning in one school, in the afternoon in the other school. Let's try it. And he wanted to know, is it working? That should have been a 2-minute phone call. You know, can we have something on agenda with a report on the success so far or lack of it from the last 6 months? That would have been something I'm sure the superintendent would have understood, prepared something for that, but he was going to do the research himself. I don't know what he was going to get out of that with just lines through it, but the point was, they needed to hear that, and the rest of the board had to empower the superintendent to be able to say, that's got to go on the agenda, or help me understand what it is you're really trying to understand, and maybe we can do that easier. We've already kind of talked about this a lot, the idea to keep the focus on student achievement. It's really, and that's part of the chair's job. I want to remind us why we're here. And it just has to be what we do. How do we relate it? You can also put time limits on the agenda items. 10 minutes, 15 minutes. The superintendent can to some extent control the presentation. If you have a staff member, you can say, you got 10 minutes. That's it. And if they're if they traditionally go over, well, have a conversation with them and they won't do it twice, maybe. But you might take another hour asking questions and digging in, but that's on you. But you can set some expectations for the meeting that will make it easier. It's also easy for your staff because, they're not trying to guess what's going to happen. So a little more about meetings. Most gatherings of the board are called meetings by law. If you are bringing the board together to discuss business, you're subject to a bunch of different laws, primarily the Freedom of Information laws. And it's the chair's responsibility to see that that's done appropriately. Now, because it's our meeting, we all can help govern ourselves. For instance, I know if I'm chairing a meeting and I don't hear somebody over here talking to their neighbor, I can't call them on it, but you might see it said point of order. I can't hear, or, we got people talking on sidebar conversations. We need to stop it. So part of the responsibility of the chair, for all the extra money you get for being chair, is part of that role. There's special meetings. Special meetings can be called at any time. And again, I'm not trying to get into like 24-hour notice and all this stuff, but just basically, you have regular meetings, you have special meetings. Regular meetings are on your calendar, January 1st through the year. People know that you can always, like the third Tuesday or whatever it is the night the board meets, and they can anticipate that if I go, I can have an opportunity to look at the things on the agenda and talk about them. Special meetings can be called for anything. The biggest difference for the special meeting is you can only talk about what's on the agenda. In a regular meeting, you can add things to the agenda through a two-thirds vote, but in a special meeting, you cannot deviate from that agenda. If you start talking about something that's off topic, you have to be called out of order. And that's just the way it goes. Whether it's a workshop, a retreat, grievance, disciplinary hearing, any of the things that aren't a regular meeting, they're all special meetings. I've been to retreats of school boards and I'll walk in and I'll say, do you have a copy of the agenda? We don't have an agenda. It's just a retreat. Did you post it? No, it's just a retreat. You gotta post every meeting. If no business is being done, when I approach something like that, I'll still do the workshop even if it wasn't posted because they're just listening. There's no action taken. Somebody wanted to file an FOI complaint, it probably win. But the reality is the commission's not interested in punishing honest mistakes. If you do something in error, they might look prescriptively and say, well, you shouldn't have voted in the executive session, so at your next board meeting, put it back on the agenda and vote on it again. That's the kind of stuff the commission wants to do. They're not trying to punish people for making honest mistakes. If you deliberately do things over and over again, they might intercede a little bit more. Oh, I should also point out, I don't remember if there's a slide on it, but there are also things that aren't meetings. So we have meetings and we have non-meetings. This can get exasperating, but non-meetings are meetings. That's stupid the way of saying it. If you have a gathering of the board that falls outside of the Freedom of Information Commission, like hiring a superintendent, for example, or I think even evaluating the superintendent, technically, I'm not sure about that one, but hiring an executive, contract negotiations are not meetings under the eye of the law. If you're negotiating with your teachers union, that is not a public meeting. It is not a meeting under the Freedom of Information Commission. A lot of boards just go into executive session for those types of things, but the reality is it's a non-meeting and you're not subject to FOI. We've talked about the agenda. That is the way you govern your meetings. The agenda is the work of the district. The purpose of your meeting is to complete the agenda. That's why things like public comment, all these other, having students participate as part of the meeting. It's all real good stuff. I mean, it shows your community. We have students who are talented. They're going to sing or they're going to present about what's going on in the schools. We want student voice at our meetings. All that stuff's important. But the reality is the reason we're here is to get the stuff done on the agenda. And so that we have to sort of pace ourselves to make sure that all these other things don't take so much time that we don't have time to do our work. The work is why we're here. But I want to make this valuable. I mean, this is kind of team stuff. And I don't want to spend a lot of time on it if you don't feel this is helpful. I think sometimes it helps to just get a refresher, but we only have so much time together that I want to make sure that it's valuable to you. Maybe I'll throw the question out a different way. If I walked in and said, we're going to talk about meetings right now, what do you want to talk about? What would I hear?
Yeah.
Okay. I still read, you want me to go a little bit further? I mean, I'm hearing no.
I think you should. We have a new member, and so I don't want to take any assumptions. Although I feel away, I think for the benefit of having a new member here.
Well, I'm actually going to speak to her later in the week and do like the roles and responsibilities that I've done with all of you. So she's going to get some additional training this week, but I'm happy to keep going. Like I said, some of it, there might be some nuggets in here that you did think about or whatever. I just want to maximize the time we have for you.
Sure, at least go through it.
Okay.
Doesn't have to be a lot of discussion, me personally, because again, we might find a nugget within it. That's my opinion.
Nobody objecting? Okay. And a lot of this I've already kind of said, one of the most important things about Robert's rules, and again, I am not a firm believer that we have to be so formal with Robert's rules that we stifle ourselves. Sometimes, and again, I've observed some of your meetings, and sometimes the Robert's rules takes over rather than what we're trying to accomplish. And you're not unique to that. That happens in a lot of places. But we have to sort of check ourselves a little bit and say, what's the reason we're here? And it's to get stuff done. And if we're using Robert's rules as a tactic so that we don't vote on something or we interfere with that process, it's not helping the greater good. It's not getting our work done. Agenda items or time limits, already talked about that.
Not me by accident.
I told you I like working off my laptop, don't I? I think we're almost there. I'm sorry. Come on. We want to start the meeting on time. I used to, when I was chair, the minute I had a quorum, if meeting started at 7 o'clock, if I had a quorum, we started. If I didn't have a quorum, I'd make sort of a little bit of a production when the quorum member came in. Well, I'm glad we finally got a quorum, and I apologize to everybody who's been waiting for the meeting to start. But that, again, that's part of the chair getting the meeting started. We can see minutes, start at 7:02, 7:15, whatever, but we want to try to start on time, particularly since you have cameras with dead air when we're not meeting, right?
Yeah.
So, or worse, the cameras on the group all sitting around talking. That could be just as bad. Limiting time. Consider this, in public comment, you limit people to 3 minutes.
We do too.
2 minutes. If you can't say something succinctly in 2 minutes, everybody's eyes start to glaze over anyway. I would say that sometimes as board members, we should consider the same rules for ourselves, or at some level of, because you know what, if somebody goes on too long in public comment, your eyes do kind of glaze over. You try really hard to keep listening, but it's hard to remain focused. They're doing the same to your colleagues are doing that to you too. We're not going to win a filibuster by talking more. So consider that keeping your own conversations as short, succinct as you can. It makes the meeting flow better. And I used to just say, I'm voting for this because, I'm voting against this because, or I'm not ready to vote because this is what I need. Short, succinct, and then get an answer or whatever and done, rather than, just going on and on. I've seen board members filibuster literally for like 10, 15 minutes, and they just get everybody mad at you when you do that. We talked about limits on staff presentations, and the board packet needs to be done adequately and in front. One of the other things is, and this is a debate that boards have all the time, I don't want to be buried in the board packet with a lot of data. So share with me at the board meeting what I really need to know. There are other superintendents say, I'm going to give you all the data, but we're only going to do a 5-minute synopsis of what it symbolizes or what it means. And then if you have individual questions about the rest of the data, we're happy to answer them. So that we're not spending 40 minutes on a presentation that maybe some of us are really into it, but the rest of us are like, how does this relate to my vote? Or is it going to really impact that? The hard part is when it's about student data, some things you have to hear whether you want to hear it or not. Some of these things you have to really kind of grasp.
I would add one word to the superintendent must prepare the board packet. This has been, it's not directly on the current superintendent, but through every superintendent, there's always been a problem with timeliness sometimes. Day before the meeting, we have dropped 100 and something pages or something like that. And that's not a way to govern, because as I said before, we have to research what we're doing and we have to know what we're talking about. I mean, if we get 100 pages of data a day or two before the meeting, nobody's reading that whole thing. And if you vote on that without extensive debate, you're not really making an informed decision.
Right. Absolutely. But Jody said, he's writing stuff down. So I know he's talking about this in terms of Biden. Sorry.
I'm just thinking of new bylaws.
Yes. It is, I hear from superintendents, sometimes somebody dropped the bomb.
I hear what Joe's saying. There's been instances, and I'm not saying this is the particular instance, but per se, there was a contract that was a 110-page contract. I'm not sure, or I don't understand. I want somebody to explain to me that it's the board members. I believe you guys should understand or be told the gist of it, but don't really need to interpret it. Like, why don't we have legal? Isn't it up to the administrator? So I'm always confused as does a board member need the actual full contract. I've had even just and I'll go to like field trips. I've heard people say, well, where's the certificate of liability insurance in the field trip packet? Is that like in the board packets? Is that a necessary document for the board members, or shouldn't we trust our administrators, cross the T's and dot their I's?
Yeah, you don't want, the board shouldn't be involved in actually looking at contracts that a superintendent is hired or his team is hired to oversee. You have business managers, people in the business department who look at contracts. You have a board attorney or corporation counsel who can also work with the superintendent to review those contracts. The superintendent can report back to the board as being, we engaged in a contract with this organization to do this kind of work. But generally speaking, I would have, from my experience as a superintendent, the Board of Education didn't review a contract I had, like for Sandy Hook Promise or something that we were doing with, if you see something, say something. That wasn't something the Board of Ed would actually look at and review. They would charge me to look at and review it. And I would report back on what we're doing, that it was reviewed by the board attorney and everything's been checked.
Joseph, ooh. Well, I don't know if anybody's been paying attention. We just recently invalidated several employment contracts because they were not done properly. City bylaws, city charter, state statute requires that we approve contracts over a certain threshold. As part of our educational mandates, one of the things we got to do is create the budget, stick with the budget, not spend money we don't have. These contracts have codicils inside them that spend more money. And when you say Gotta trust the administrators, trust. Again, you gotta remember where we are. You gotta remember that you guys got 169 districts, maybe you got 3 or 4 who have unique systems where administration has abused the process. So this district, I'm gonna be clear on record, any contract I vote on, I want to read it as completion.
But if I understand, Jody, right,
Yes, yeah.
under that circumstance, we would have been informed of a contract that had been reviewed by the city attorney and passed through certain approval steps, none of which was done. I'm not trying to resurrect, so
Yeah.
we, in reviewing how to codify in our bylaws process, need to make sure that we do that properly. So that it's consistent with city policy, and I'm not trying to have the argument now.
No, you,
And so I'm just saying, the argument as in what's the best way to handle it. We don't want to see, I've had this discussion with Danielle recently, every student permission slip presented in a packet. I don't want to see them. You know, if there's 120 kids going to nature's, what you call it,
It's just
classroom, I don't want to see that in the packet. I don't have to see they all signed it. But we do want to know that the administrator in the school and the administrator who oversees that section have made sure that, so there's got to be a checklist that says, you know, we have 120 approvals signed by the parent. We have X number or whatever else needs to check. This has all been done properly. Okay, we're going to approve it. In a contract, there's going to be a checklist of some other sorts. Check. This has all been done. So we are approving an agreement, whether it's to hire, you know, Jane Smith for this position at this salary with these benefits. And we may have questions about the benefits or about that position, or this school for this program, you know, this Catholic, former Catholic school to be used as an extension of this program, you know, under these circumstances. So I get what you're saying.
So with,
And so we don't necessarily need to, and that's something that Willie's committee will work with Jody at some point to look at whether we can shorten that in putting it into our packets or not. And we're not going to resolve that tonight.
Right.
I see that.
and you have to ensure that all these various checkpoints are in place. And you also, as a board, you can, when your superintendent reports to you that he signed a contract with an organization, your questions should absolutely be, does this tie the district or the board to any liability? Does it tie the district to any finances? Where, if it does, where are you getting the money from the budget? Those are all reasonable questions, but again, I don't think you want to sit there and actually.
Well, I think what Joe's saying is that we're not going to ask, he's not going to report, we signed this contract. He's going to report, I'm proposing that you sign it, we reached this agreement, and we're going to question him about it before, and if we vote to approve, then he's going to sign
I'd
it.
like to.
That's what I'm saying, is the short circuit.
Yeah.
That it gets shortened that way, and so I'm leaving it there.
Make sure.
I'm trying to shorten it.
Gonna come back up.
I want, trying to get to another sort of question, which is that when the superintendent, I've heard this at CAPE meetings the last 2 years, CAPE conferences, superintendent does submit a report in advance to us though, before a meeting.
Typically.
Yes,
Yeah.
that we get to look at before, so that we're prepared with questions for the superintendent of his or her report to us in advance. That's normal, right?
If I didn't send my board information to review with enough time to review it before a meeting, I would hear about it.
Okay, thank you.
And it'd be an extra hour in your board meeting.
just one quick, one sentence. There's a difference between something that's signed and a hard copy that has to be scanned in, and a contract which is already prepared on electronic devices to just hit separate button to send. Not a heavy lift. We're not going down into deep dark basements and pulling out files. Everything is electronic for the most part. So it's not a big heavy lift to get a copy of a contract into the portal on our records.
But again, you're gonna have a discussion of bylaws, and this will, I'm sure, gonna be a topic that you talk about. I think it's really more, is there a process in place that protects us from things that may not have been protected in the past? Not necessarily the board is gonna do more scrutiny and read every contract.
Best practice.
All right, can't really see that till it's Darth Vader talking to his officer. I find your lack of faith in Robert's rules disturbing. And this one, I call it closing arguments, early edition of Robert's Rules of Order, the Big Rock. I don't want to get into, we can talk about history. The idea was people have been having meetings for years and they've not always worked out well. So Henry Roberts came up with his version. Before that, I think they used one that was written by Thomas Jefferson, originally in Congress. But Robert's Rules designed to ensure the rights of the majority. At some point, we get to vote, but it also protects the rights of the minority so that everybody gets to be heard and defends the rights of individual members. So we're balancing a variety of different things when we talk about Robert's Rules. But the reason they call them rules, and the purpose is to get the work done. It isn't to be formal. I've seen some board meetings through you, Madam Chair, to the, and you just go on these long, lengthy things. And if you don't do it right, somebody calls you out of order and it's not getting the work done. Small groups have a different set of Robert's Rules, basically. They have, for small groups, much more simpler rules, much easier. The purpose is, you treat one item at a time. We don't have 3 or 4 things on the floor at the same time. We're voting on one thing, and that's it. We extend courtesy and fairness to all. We take turns speaking, which approved by the chair to speak. The majority rules. At the end of the day, somebody votes, everybody votes, somebody wins, somebody doesn't. But we're trying to guarantee the rights of everybody. And I'd say beyond that, this is practical, not rules. But I always found that when there's a particularly contentious issue, and it's getting ugly, that we have to remind ourselves that, if we do prevail, we don't want to make the other folks feel bad. We don't want to make it a personal thing. I've seen some boards where I don't agree with you, you're evil. We're seeing a lot of that on the national level, kind of people, are being demonized on whatever side you're on. And it's gotten very personal, but we have to stay stuck on what we're voting on. And it's one thing at a time. And the rules allow us to move from piece to piece or within that, but it's always done in an organized fashion. I'm going to just go to, there's 2 basic kinds of motion, some that affect order, some that handle substance. So we're either voting on something that is one of the reasons we're at this meeting. So we want to pass things, we want to vote on things, we want to give permission to do things. Those are substance. That's the outcome of that is something getting done by the school district. The others are order. So we're either following the plan, we're following Robert's Rules according to order, or we're out of order because we are no longer following the plan. We're either talking about something that's not on the table. We are not talking about something that has anything to do with our work. And again, that's some part of the chair's responsibility to say, you strayed from what the topic is, you strayed from the motion, and I really want to pull you back. And frankly, and I got distracted when I was chair because I'm checking to see what's going on over here and I'm not hearing this. Every one of you, it's your meeting. It isn't the chair's meeting, it's your meeting. So anybody can call a point of order. And then it's up to the chair to rule, is that a valid point of order or is it not a valid point of order? And then we go on from there. And if it's out of order, you stop. You just stop and you keep going on what you were doing before that. Lots of procedural meetings. Also, meetings can be debatable or not debatable. There's a whole bunch of rules when it comes to Robert's Rules. This is not the 3-hour version of this tonight, so I'm not going to go through that with you. There are tools available. Does the chair have the final word? Somebody can appeal the decision of the chair. And that's a motion. It has to be seconded, and then there's a vote. If the board feels that the chair's decision was inappropriate, you know, so
Appeal.
it's a collaborative. It's collaborative. You appeal to the decision of the chair. So, lots of different motions. These are mostly procedural, but it gets too complicated for 10 minutes or so. But the main motion is the cornerstone. That's debatable. That is what we are trying to do. Now, if we like the motion, but maybe instead of 6 months, we want a year, we can amend the motion. That requires another motion. And then you park the main motion, you're now voting on the amendment. And you can vote yes, or you can vote no. If you vote yes, it becomes part of the original motion. If you vote no, it doesn't become part of the original motion, then you would still be voting on the original motion. I'm getting tired just hearing myself. But you have action motions. These are things that cause something to happen. Main motions, subsidiary motions. You can amend. You can also have division. Let's say we want to have this program and we want it to start by July 1st. Somebody said, I want to divide the question, so I want to move separately on whether we do it, but I want the time to be a separate discussion. I want to vote separately on the time because we may want to vary that. So that's called dividing or division. I wish I had time to show you this because this is one of the worst meetings ever. It really is. It's horrible. But if you go on YouTube and search for Carpentersville, the title of this one's called The Most Outrageous Government Board Meeting Ever. And Carpentersville has a bunch of them. No, I think Indiana maybe, or Illinois. It's a Midwest town.
We don't have.
They talk that way too. Y'all it's amazing, but I stopped dead in my tracks when I watch it. So,
Do you hear that?
here's a simple meeting. You call to order. And this would be a very valid, a meeting could be called to order. You vote, let's say your main motion is to adopt the minutes. You vote. If it passes, great. If it doesn't, well, you'll deal with that. However, you might not have minutes that year, but you can call to order, vote to approve the minutes and adjourn if that's all you have to do. Your minutes in Connecticut only have to reflect action of the board. So perfectly appropriate minutes would be the board came to order at 7, the board adopted the minutes at 7:05, and here we record the vote or whatever. The board adjourned at 7:15, and that's perfectly legitimate. Now, most boards want a little bit more so that it sets the record straight, but you don't, and forget the boards that have like public comment verbatim, every public comment. That doesn't have to be part of minutes. It's action of the board. But in the simplest meeting, you come to order, you have a motion, you vote, motion, you vote, motion, you vote, and you adjourn. It never stays simple. This is what can happen. And I had a lot of fun putting this together, but it took me a few days. So here's your agenda. Agenda item 1. This is all agenda item 1, by the way. Agenda item 2 would be the second page. So you might not have a motion. There might be, in a school district, often the superintendent does a presentation or one of the staff does a presentation. And at that point, at the end of that presentation, the board may decide I make a motion that we adopt this. Then it becomes a motion, but you might not get a motion. And at that point, the chair goes, in the absence of a motion, we're moving on to the second thing. But I want to still talk about it. No, there's no motion on the floor. There's no discussion. So we're going to move to the next item on the agenda. If you do make a motion, you might go to an amendment. It might fail. It might pass. You can have subsidiary motions like motion to table. In other words, using procedure, you can make a whole lot of things happen. And again, this is the short version, so I can't go into this in detail. But imagine if you've got 10 or 15 items on your agenda and the potentials for all this. It's really incumbent on the chair to understand the rules, and everybody can pick up, like the Idiot's Guide for Robert's Rules or one of those things. They're pretty. We have one in our bookstore that's a guide to Robert's Rules that's pretty decent. So there are options for you to learn the rules. But the big point I would say, and the point I think that the state has observed in the past, and again, at the last couple of meetings, I didn't see it is prevalent, but that the rules are being used to disrupt rather than to achieve. And our goal is to get our work done. And so some of it's an honor system. You know, we're going to do this work and we're gonna, everything is in our effort. Whether I'm voting for it or against, it's my job to help the thing, especially as board chair. I used to make sure that what, even if I didn't agree with the motion, that they were heard, that it got on the table, and if the board willed it, then it passed. And it wasn't my responsibility to see. Even though I didn't like it, it wasn't my job to make that not happen. It's my job to facilitate the work of the board. I get paid twice as much as everybody else. I really want us to talk more about what Jody wants to talk about. Could probably get you some copies of this card. This is like all the different rules and I'll make sure we'll send it to you. We'll make it up so I don't forget tomorrow.
I think they come in our packet,
They do.
but we probably use it.
Picking up crumbs too.
Oh, here's what I said. I want this piece.
Is it laminated?
It is, yeah.
Paper. Perfect. This is very figure. So interesting story about that. The Illinois School Boards Association first printed this about 20 years ago. And we were real excited about it. And we have a code in the state association, Steal Without Guilt. And so we duplicated it, we replicated it. What we didn't see at the bottom was this little thing from Notes and Comments on Robert's Rules by John Erickson. Well, guess who we had come and do a presentation on Robert's Rules? And these were in our packet. And here's the author of the book that includes this card, Seeing Caves all over this card. He actually took it with great humor. He was flattered that we were using it. In fact, he signed some copies. I mean, he could have gotten very upset. This workshop, by the way, was about 5 hours long. I wasn't kidding when I said there's a long version. He did it in such a way it was all really interesting and really exciting. He used a lot of humor, which you need when you talk about Robert's Rules, but it's very intense. But the purpose of it is only to make our life easier, not to make it harder. I know this kind of, we flashed through this stuff, but I, again, hoping that there's some takeaways from this. And there's always the opportunity to follow up later and ask other questions if you would.
I'm exhausted.
I got to drive home. I'm gonna sit for a minute. You go ahead, Jim.
So I think I stepped on a minefield before saying that these bylaws that were adopted in 2019 are your bylaws. One of the things I'll say about Caves project with Bridgeport Board of Ed is we're engaged in policy work with you guys. And the idea is to level set. So one of the things, again, every district has its own legends and narratives. One of the things we heard about Bridgeport, talking to various board members, is that there are different policies for different schools. And for example, I remember when I was a superintendent, I asked the question, or someone mentioned, a science teacher mentioned to me during budget time that we needed 2 additional science teachers in high school. And so I talked to that person and said, well, why do you need 2? Well, science teachers, your class sizes are 18, average, highest class of 22. Seems like it's comparable to English classes and math classes and other classes. So the person said, well, the science department has a policy that we can't have more than 14 students in a classroom because of safety issues. Thanks. The science department has a policy. We're that way. And so I have to point out that when you use the word policy, you're using that word. To me, it expresses that the Board of Education adopted a policy through deliberation. It's in the manual. It has an adoption date, and that's the policy. If you, as a science department, sat together and discussed what's in the best interest of children, there's some issues around safety. Those are all management requests that we can make to the superintendent or to the board as we develop a budget. we use the word policy, when I think very specifically that this is the policy on the Bridgeport Public Schools, not a school, not a magnet school or a charter school in Bridgeport, but this is Bridgeport's policies that were adopted by the full board of education on a specific date and reading manual. So looking at, this is a process. So the first part of the process in working with the superintendent and Olivia and the office, the superintendent's office, was to identify, because we're going to look at all of your policies. We're going to provide you model policies and express where you may need additional policies, where you might want to rescind certain policies. So by the time this project is over, you will have a Bridgeport policy manual that expresses the board's will in terms of what you think are the critical issues from the Bridgeport Public Schools. And that's going to take time. That's not going to happen at the end of the year. It can happen over 3 years. And so the first part of the process, having been superintendent, having gone through this on the other end, as the superintendent, the last thing I wanted was all 9 series to land on my desk and for the board to adopt, me to figure out how I'm going to get this manual in the board's hands and to review it and have the board adopt it in a reasonable amount of time. So we discussed if jump in if I get this wrong. The first meeting we had was, what are the critical areas? What do you need to get adopted? And so we identified 2 critical areas. One, mandated policies, federally mandated or state mandated policies that required being your board manual that aren't in the board manual. The second was to identify mandated policies that you have in your manual, but they need to be updated. So working with, again, your superintendent, we shared with your superintendent, the superintendent's office, we shared from our initial review that there were a number of policies that need to get, that aren't in your manual, that need to get in your manual, but through adoption. And there are several of them. But looking at the critical ones that need to be there, like tomorrow. And I did write this down. Someone said that we can start doing this now. This is one example. We can start doing that. Someone said, I didn't write down the name, but someone said, I think you can start doing it. You want to have a Title IX policy. And with all the stuff. You need that, so again, we're not going to talk about why or why not, but your board manual needs to have the Title IX policy. And the Title IX policy that I spent all summer writing, the 2024 Title IX regulations. Forget that. All the work I did over the summer writing a policy to comply with the 20 are now all withdrawn. And we're back to 2020. So, we shared with superintendent's office updated 2020 policy that is compliant with the 2020 regulations. My suggestion would be that I'm a big believer in deliberating. You know, I think that 98% of the policies that you get, I want to make sure you should be doing 2 readings. We should be thinking about it, should be reviewing it, having discussion about it. You know, if you're dealing with a policy around dress code, you want to bring your principals in. If you're dealing with a policy around health issues, you want to bring your nurses in. You want to understand, okay, you see the CAVE model. You want to see how that model needs to fit Bridgeport. So we'll give you a model policy, but you need to deliberate on how to make that model policy compliant with the law, but fit Bridgeport's needs, and that takes deliberation. Title IX is one of those policies. My suggestion would be, it's one of those times where you can waive your 2 reads and deliberation and everything. Just get your policy approved in your packet, get the training going. I'm going to guess you probably are even doing the training. and people are being trained in schools, which want the policy, because if there were to be a complaint made through Title IX, you don't have the first question, OCR, the Office of Civil Rights will ask, do you have a policy in place? You want to say yes to that. Second question they'll ask is everybody trained? And if everybody's trained, but there's no policy, you'll get ding on that. It's just not the kind of climate we're living in right now where you want to deal with OCR and complaint that could be handled through a punishment. So, but there are, again, this superintendent has this report. There are things here that provide a bit of a roadmap to move forward in getting those policies in place, mandated policies. And again, start with Title IX. We also have some policies that are in place, but they need to be updated to be compliant with state law. And things like, for example, recruitment and selection, non-discrimination, alcohol, drugs, tobacco, psychotropic drug use. There are a variety of policies that the superintendent knows, and with his staff will be bringing those to you. We want to act quickly on the mandated policies. Once I hear that these policies, it's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen over a couple of months, but it's going to happen over the next. It'd be wonderful if you get all these mandated policies in place by the end of the summer. I think that'd be a great goal. So again, sometimes you're going to look at this and say, you know what, this is a mandated policy. You don't need to wordsmith it. Just need to understand, so let the superintendent or member of his team come and share with us what this policy means. And let's just get it adopted so we can move with the training and get everybody aware of what the policy is. And that would move you really much closer to having a district, Bridgeport Public School District policy with all the mandated policies in place. But that's work that you're already engaged in. And that's what I wanted to say. I mean, we will, I will hear from you that perhaps this policy document that I have on bylaws that says Bridgeport Board of Education bylaws, policy series 9000 adopted February 13, 2019. This is not your most updated policy on bylaws. Send them to me and we'll.
I have them for you.
Well, I'll have Danielle work on it because she's been
Right.
verifying it.
Correct.
And so she has,
Like I said, I have for you.
Yeah, so I think this is, again, I think this is really level setting exercise. That in my view, what I want you to understand is that when I do projects for boards of education, there are policies that I look at that are written in 1996, in 1992. So I don't want you to beat yourself up over that. The fact that you're doing this work, in my view, is really ahead of over half of the districts in the state of Connecticut. Not every district has a Title IX 2020 policy adopted. I'm still getting calls about the 2020 policy. It doesn't mean that if OCR got a complaint that you'd be off the hook because other districts don't have it. But it means that you can't beat yourself up over this. This is a great opportunity for you guys, I think, to really level set, become a Bridgeport district and have your policies be for every child in Bridgeport. And I will help you. I help the superintendent. We talk all the time to continue to be strategic about how he works with you. You know, you're hearing things like he's hearing things you don't want to report day before a board meeting. So and then have to act on something so he knows and he's sensitive to giving you time to think about and review something and understand it and be educated on it before you cast your critical vote. And he's going to provide with you some strategy around it. This is really not, it's not one of those things you really need to deliberate over. This is something you really do need to deliberate over. And get things that you don't have to get the things you do have to deliberate, and the time deliberating. And be strategic about which ones you start with. And get the muscle memory around having addressing conflicts, working through debate. Do you have a policy committee?
Yes.
So the policy committee is the first place. So that's the place we want to start all of this and Willie, you're working with the superintendent to develop a schedule for getting policies adopted. I mean, all that is workable, doable stuff. And then Willie comes in and says, my committee met and we're prepared to share this policy with the board. You trust this guy, you trust his deliberation with his group, and that you ask questions of him, and he'll give you the answers, and that would be your first read, get your second read done, and you get your adoption, and then get the adoption date, send it to everybody that needs to see it, and you have a great process in place. You got your person here. So that's the news around policy work.
Jody, do you have that list to show us? You went through the update list real quick. It's something you're handing out to us or?
It's something that the superintendent.
Yeah, I did. We going to get it. As soon as I get to the policy committee, I was gonna give it to you. We haven't had a policy meeting yet.
Yeah.
So,
And that would be appropriate to have Willie and superintendent look at it, talk about it. Because again, I think it's more important than the actual list is the strategy for tackling those.
There's a whole lot of them. I mean, but he identified like 5 critical ones that we need.
You wrapped it off a few. I was asking, we're gonna get back. So they told me,
And the other thing I wanted to share, just I want to get you out here on time, is the actual bylaws themselves. Specifically, the state doesn't really reference they know that you're doing the policy work. So you can kind of cross that off your urgent list in terms of you need to do it. You're doing it because you're a board that needs to do it. You believe it's important to have it. What the state is saying, however, in terms of my training with you, is that we need to look at the bylaw, the 9,000 series, look at its outcome. The outcome must result in new updated board bylaws to the extent necessary to, this is the critical piece, to ensure that they include methods for Bridgeport Board of Education to resolve board disputes, manage board conflict, and address violations of such bylaws by the board or its members. So if you don't have anything in your bylaws that gets to the issue around conflict resolution, what I want you to start thinking about prior to my coming in and talking, I'm not going to come and talk about policy with you. I'm going to come and talk about bylaws specifically. So as you start looking at your bylaws, as you start reviewing your bylaws, what you want to ask yourself is, okay, these are really great. They guide our work together as a board. Do they address ways of, if there is a conflict, if there is a violation of the bylaw, what's the board's behavior? What does the board need to do to bring in that person who violated the bylaws? What do we do when we have a conflict? What do we do when, for example, someone looks at takes the parliamentary procedure or Robert's rules and uses them more for power than for facilitating discussion, and takes a half-hour conversation and does the an hour filibuster or whatever you're dealing with at any time that's causing frustration, angst, and keeping you from your work. What tools do you have in the bylaws that help you facilitate through that? So you don't have to bring your corporation counsel in and deal with legal needs. These are your bylaws, but how do you want to operate as a board? That's what I'm going to spend my time with. So if you have ideas, if you have specific bylaws that you'd like to include that address it, or if there are already bylaws that exist that you think could make sense to include that kind of language on conflict resolution, that would also be appropriate. And you can feel free to share that with me, send that to me. I'll have to review it. I could be a critical friend. What I don't want is to come one of these future days and do a 3-hour workshop with you around the wonderful world of bylaws. This is an opportunity for us to really create them and to say to the state that we have the bylaws in place. We address these critical issues around conflict, dealing with violation of bylaws. And these are the bylaws that address that. and the board develop them without my pressure and twisting of arms to do that. So that's kind of, I guess that would be your homework assignment as I will look at your new bylaws. I will look at them to see if there are specific bylaws that might help you along as well. I heard some things around bylaws that may, for example, if you have a student representative on the board.
Yes.
Student representative, great for keeping the board honest. So one.
Non-voting.
Non-voting, yeah, non-voting, but if you have a policy on that or bylaw, we're reading that, there's some ideas about it. You have time limits for board members, receiving information from the superintendent, timely fashion, process for contract review by the board. So there are some things that I've heard you mentioned today in Nick's presentation that I'll go back to my laboratory and see what's in Cade's bylaws, model bylaws, to see if any of those might be helpful. And if I can see anything, I will share them with the superintendent, who will then share them with Willie to, I'm sorry, Mr. Medina.
Please find, please.
And John's fine. To begin that process, to see if there are bylaws that aren't in your bylaws that may be helpful in addressing some of the things, the ancillary things you discussed or acted about here. So, any questions on that, or it seemed like a fair process forward?
I don't have a question, but I have a comment. It's something that I'm glad you talked bylaws. And this is something that when I started as a board member 7 years, that me and Mr. Sutherland, we were talking about the bylaw, how to update it. Talking about former chairs that we are bringing to the board, are bringing so many years, we need to update this, we need to update it, and then trying to say, yes, we're gonna do it, we're gonna do it, we're gonna do it. And I'm very glad that now they wanna update it, the way it's supposed to be, because, it's good to, things change, so things have to be updated. And now Mr. Medina will be on top of that and everybody. But I'm very glad we talk about that because I'm waiting for that so many years to update it.
Yeah. I heard the word opportunity passed around tonight and expressed in various levels. I think this is really great opportunity. So, Terry said you had homework. You actually have some homework. I'm passing there. One of the expectations from the state was that you participate in a board self-evaluation that will be used sort of as a measure for the progress you make over the next 6 meetings. I found this one very good way on my computer. I hadn't seen it in a long time, but it's been our traditional board self-evaluation is the board has a policy, the board does this, the board does that. This is really more of an assessment of your meetings, the way you govern yourselves. For example, and I want to explain how to do it because I had to remind myself how to do it. We have, I think it's 11 statements. First one, for example, I'll just walk you through the first one. There's a statement 1 and statement 2 in each of these. Statement 1 for the first one is, it seems that there are people on the board, even me, who spend a lot of time in the interview doing things that are not consistent with what I believe is our main purpose. They downplay or overlook important parts of our total objective. They direct their efforts at things that aren't very important. That's one end of the spectrum. The other side, statement 2, is the board's basic overall objectives are clear to me. All of our board efforts are directly related to accomplishing our goals. Whenever a question arises about what needs to be done, we are able to set priorities by referring to our basic objectives. Now, here's the challenge. There's 5 categories. The first one, I'm just like 1. So that's statement 1. I feel that we don't necessarily stay focused. That's us. I'd put a 1 or circle A. It's more like 1 than 2, circle B. So it's maybe a B minus. It's right in between. It could go either way. That's the C. D, it's more like 2 than 1, and then E, just like 2. So you're going to look at these and then try to judge where do I think that what we are as a board. I'd like you to get them back to me, either maybe through Danielle or I don't have them electronic. I haven't figured out a way of doing this yet, where it would be easy to do. I'm trying to work on Excel, but it's not there yet. So if you could, or maybe through Dr. Avery's office, just get them back to us.
before our next meeting, and we'll spend the first 20 minutes or a half hour going over the results. And then at the end, we're gonna want to do the same thing, so we can show the state that some of this stuff has made a difference. I suspect some of it might have already be doing it a little differently than it might have earlier today. Yeah.
I have a question. So I'm obviously new and I don't have, like, as a board member, I've only been part of one meeting.
Mhm.
How should I build this out from like a parent's perspective when I was when I was on the outside looking in at these meetings? I just want to make sure that I don't like skew any scores.
I don't, you have an opinion, however it was based, whether it's experiences of parent, and you haven't had the opportunity to work collectively with everyone, so some of these make it, and you could either leave it blank, or in the middle, but I would say, but as you're looking at it, if you feel uncomfortable responding, tabulate. I mean, it's really, use your judgment, you're a member of this board, you have a right to participate, so I would say answer them as truthfully or as honestly as you can. Okay. Either as a parent or as a board member, your observations, what you've seen on the board, whatever it is, but,
Seems that you can explain that in your observations.
And
Yeah.
we'll have we'll have 3 board meetings before the next training, so might get some. And then everybody can have it done by the 24th, the week before.
the week before should be.
And then, yes, and then, like, if you can bring it to the 24th meeting that we have, the meeting on the 24th, we can have it. And y'all scan it for, well, I'll put it in my,
And then by then I'll figure out the way of collecting it all and aggregating it, so it'll be a little easier.
By the meeting, by the 24th meeting.
Don't wait till the 23rd.
here.
We can just scan it and then email it.
Yeah.
You could do that too. Any observations as we close, comments?
Well, listening to what Maritza asked, Jim's response. There is an implication in the response that we're basing it on the last 2 months as a board. The last 2 months as a board.
I was saying that for Maritza, she's only been on it for months, so
I understood.
her
I
usually,
understood.
and maybe ours should be on the time we've been on board.
I understood. So that was my comment, is that for us, the focus is on the immediacy, but there is a past. And there's a sort of.
A lot of these are reflective, so however you feel right now, is how you're gonna answer it. It may, your reflection may be based on things that have happened. But I think,
Well, what I was getting at was that the state's actions are based on the past.
but what, all they're looking for is growth.
Right. And so, but they ignored our growth, is my comment. And I feel like we are growing, and that was the gist of what I wanted to say, was I feel like they have ignored our growth and that we are growing.
I have really not had conversations with them to know what they're looking for other than the instructions that they ordered.
Not directed at you.
No,
I comment this an observation.
but all we can do is the best we can.
Yes.
Okay, I guess, the absence of any other comments? Eric, you want to include the meeting?
Yeah, I just wanted, first of all, I was hoping that you said before, I don't want to be thinking, and I know everybody say the same thing. This is not wasting money. This has helped us a lot. And like, I'm very appreciative that you guys probably help us to visit us for the week. I really appreciate that.
I just hope that out of these meetings that we able to start being able to accept criticism from each other, be able to take it, learn from it, and move on, not take it as an insult. And we have to be able to accept all types of criticism. We deserve it. So,
Well, sitting in the hot seat.
Yeah, so hopefully that, you know, when we start talking or we're able to pinpoint what we're talking instead of, because I was always the type of kid in school who got mad when the teacher punished the whole class for something that one person did. And I used to always say, why don't you do it? And I used to get in trouble for that. So, but now I'm older where we could actually point to the person who is the problem, and we could, and hopefully if we do point to you, or if I'm pointed at, I could be able to accept the criticism and be able to make myself better.
And the only other thing is, as a caveat, this all happened very quickly. As you all know, it's kind of 1 minute they say you got to do this, the next minute it's tomorrow. And so, this first, while we tried to make it real and make it applicable, I didn't have the time to put into it that I would like to, like an extra couple of weeks. So I apologize if it didn't meet expectations. On the other hand, I think it gave you, I'm trying to get you to think what's possible rather than what's the mechanics of all this stuff, because many of you have heard that. And that hasn't changed much, but I think you gelling around thoughts, concepts, vision, is the way to really get to the next step. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve, for putting together. It left the work we had to do this, so we'll be here like 3 weeks, so.
Yeah, I'm sure.
I'll entertain a motion. Is there a move? Moved by second by Tucker. All in favor? Adjourning at 9:20. Thank you.
I hope they don't get me for 2 minutes.